either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today, we hope you are entertained. Or we're giving you the thumbs down and sending you to the gulag.
It is time for Gladiator.
Yes. We decided on doing this one because we had already done Braveheart and The Patriot.
We figured we'd round out Mr. Crow's career.
Yes.
And we had just got done doing his worst film.
Les Mis. I don't know if Les Mis is his worst.
Well, he got a lot of heat for that one. So
yeah. And it's just also the historic epic that came out around the same time as the other two we previously had done, so.
Very true. And also, this is a historic epic in a genre we haven't really touched yet.
Yes. So, for those unfamiliar, Gladiator is a 2000 swords and sandals film that follows a Roman general turned slave as he seeks revenge against the new emperor.
It is... There is so much sword fighting
Yes.
in this film. And I had originally gone in being excited to analyze this film because, as we know, I love a historical piece.
Yep.
I love looking at the costumes. I like looking at the decorations. I like looking at the architecture. This one hurt a little bit. Not in the same way that others we've done have, where it's like bad for no reason. This one is bad for a reason.
Yeah, it tries giving an impression, not actually being historically accurate to the T.
No. And, it also doesn't blatantly, at no point has in any of the interviews or commentary or quotes that I could find from anyone who worked on this movie, no one blatantly says, yes, we know that was a thing and we chose not to do it, which we've talked about those types of movies before. So, I'm not the most angry at this film. However, after rewatching it, after having watched this movie multiple times in school, watching it when it came out originally, having several people in my circle of movie friends who thought this movie top tier, very good, I am now here to argue that this movie is not, in fact, very good.
Alrighty then. Yeah, and I mean, I was talking to my mom about this a little bit too, of movies that I saw young. And then middle school is still, well, technically I was in American elementary school, but... Yeah,
well, American elementary schools, depending on where you live, could be a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I saw it, I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, which for me was middle school.
Yes,
so.
yeah.
But Gladiator, directed by Ridley Scott, with story by David Franzoni, and...
It is now Sir Ridley Scott, by the way. He has been knighted.
Okay, Sir Ridley Scott, whatever. With screenplay by Franzoni, John Logan, and William Nicholson.
Yes.
It stars Russell Crowe,
sure does.
Joaquin Phoenix, Connie Nelson, and Oliver Reed.
To name a few.
Yes,
the list is long.
And we're just stuck with the main group that we see, the main players per se.
That's fair.
Scott, who by this point was famous for Alien and Blade Runner.
Yeah, solid choices.
Yes, which we've talked about a bit before covering Alien. He would go from this to direct Hannibal, Black Hawk Down, Matchstick Men, and another historical movie with Russell Crowe, Robin Hood.
Yeah, okay, so Robin Hood, when it came out, got some heat for not being good.
I never saw it.
I did. I love Robin Hood. I have watched all of the Robin Hoods I can get my hands on. I know I'm missing some, because Robin Hood, much like Sherlock Holmes, is one of those characters who, physically can't die, and you also physically can't consume all of their content, because it is everywhere. It is forever. But I was very excited for Robin Hood, the 2010 one, because I was excited for what was supposed to be a very historically based Robin Hood. Still gonna have the fantasy elements, much like Gladiator. And I was still living in the blur that Gladiator, because I had at that point seen Gladiator 1 or 2 times, but much like The Patriot, much like Braveheart, I had not studied.
Yeah.
So I went in with expectations incredibly high, much like a lot of people with Robin Hood, and a lot of people came out of it very disappointed because it was not super historically accurate, because it was overly dramatic. It was pretty much Gladiator, but with Robin Hood slapped on top. And so that is why I think Gladiator deserves a revisiting. because I think it has the exact same problems that Robin Hood did.
Alright. Well, Franzoni doesn't have too much to his writing credits. He started with a show called Jumping Jack Flash, Citizen Cohen, Amistad, and before this he had only done 2004's King Arthur.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's an okay one. Nothing to write home about.
I don't know too much of the Arthurian movies.
It falls in that Robin Hood realm again, where, like, there's, like, 2 or 3 that are truly great, and then everything else is just kind of okay.
Okay. As for Logan, he did quite a few TV movies before Gladiator, including Never the Sinner and Tornado with an exclamation point.
Just different than the TV, or the straight-to-DVD Tornado.
Yes. But they also wrote Bats.
Yes. Good.
But he has since gone to work on The Time Machine, Star Trek Nemesis, The Last Samurai, The Aviator, Sweeney Todd, Alien Covenant with Scott again.
Some very solid choices in there.
Yep. As for Nicholson, also started in TV movies with Martin Luther, Heretic, but outside of that, he was, you might recognize that name as being one of the writers for Les Mis on our last episode.
You know what? You get the vibe.
Yeah.
There's some similarities here.
Yep. And Crow we talked about on our last episode, but he had been in The Man with the Iron Fist, Cinderella Man, The Quick and the Dead, and A Beautiful Mind.
I will say, though, that this is the movie that, like, propelled him into, like, what people considered main acting, like, main lead spotlight.
Yeah.
People knew his name, he was well-liked, but, like, Gladiator moved him from, like, a good actor to, like, oh, Russell Crowe is the title card.
Yeah, pretty much. He was the draw for this movie.
Exactly.
Which I think that's probably what they try to do with Robin Hood.
It was 100%, however, it did not work.
Yeah. So, Phoenix started off in television with the TV series version of Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which I didn't know existed.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's just as bad.
Yep. But prior to Gladiator, he was in 8mm with Nicolas Cage.
Of course.
And since Gladiator, he's been in all kinds of stuff, like The Shining, The Village, Her, and more recently, Joker.
I mean, those are some solid movies.
Yep. Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, with a few occasions.
Nielsen, who has also been in quite a bit, started off in a French flick called Père ou te rentre.
Ouch. Okay, yeah.
On les passe vous sur terre.
Uh-huh.
But probably most of us know her in The Devil's Advocate and Rushmore.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. But also she's been in quite a bit. 1 Hour Photo, The Catcher Was a Spy.
Solid.
As well as Hippolyta in the DC universe.
I'm not a super DC person, I'm so sorry.
The lead Amazon chick.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah. Reed, on the other hand, has been in so much, starting uncredited in 1955 in The Value for Money as an extra, but outside of Gladiator, he's best known for Oliver, The Brood, The Four Musketeers, Milady's Revenge.
Yes, yes.
But he was also in Spasms, which was mentioned in our Anaconda episode. And
yeah, that's true.
A movie that's been on my list for a while, The Devils.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, just to show some sort of his range. And
I mean, he was a very talented actor. Unfortunately, this is his last credit.
Yes. Yep. But before we dive in, I would like to acknowledge our resources and our sources. Commentary by Ridley Scott and Russell Crowe. Commentary by pretty much everyone else involved in the production.
Good God, there's so much.
History of Italian Cinema by Peter Bondinella, as well as the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh, and also, I went to the Colosseum, not specifically for this, but I did go to the Colosseum and I dug up my old reading on it, because architectural history.
I went there, yeah, I've been to the Colosseum too. I've been to a couple.
When we were deciding to go, it was like a day trip. We were like going there to see it and like sprint around and come back. And like me and my roommate were the only 2 architects on this trip to go see it. So everyone else was like super stoked to like get food and do shopping. And her and I were like, we have so much stuff to see. So like we booked it through as much as we could. And while we were doing that, we were also like deep reminding ourselves, because we also had to take, I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 years worth of architectural history.
Yeah.
The Colosseum and Rome in general being a large chunk of that class. So, like, I dug up those old textbooks because there's a lot of, like, commentary and talk about the, like, Colosseum itself. Like, and not just, like, the main Colosseum in Rome, but Colosseums in general were a big inspiration for this movie. And I wanted to look and see how much of that was actually true, because I found quite a lot while I was going through the commentary and the quotes from people who worked on this, that there was a lot of, I got the inspiration from.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, the next couple sentences would just be straight out not real.
Yeah.
And so I had to do some background checking on the work, on, like, because again, like, not just, like, the Colosseum, but Colosseums in general were an inspiration for the original writing of this piece, for the original theming of this piece.
Yep.
Some of the original romantic paintings of gladiators in Rome were, like, a huge inspiration on how this movie was shot, which is so cool. But, like, there's so much not fact that also went into this movie.
Oh, yeah. No. And, yeah, my viewing of Rome was a bit different than yours.
Yes, I think you had a little bit more free time than I did.
We stayed in a nunnery, and we had a tour guide who was a priest in training.
Ooh, very fancy.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, we sprinted across the city. Got some miles in that day.
Yeah, but as well, before we do dive into it, I do also want to say that we are reviewing the extended cut.
Yes.
And Scott does state that the theatrical cut is the director's cut. The extended cut was just to add some additional scenes that people might find interesting without actually adding, like, all the deleted scenes.
And on top of that, by this point, I think the extended one isn't just readily available on DVD, but it's also the one that, like, ends up on TV quite often.
Oh, it's easy to find. If you can get your hands on the 3-disc signature selection DVD, it's very easy. It's the only DVD that's listed as signature selection, so...
Yeah, and even when, like, the DVD selection was, like, fresh off the press, the extended version of this was something that was, like, very quickly snatched up by fans, because they were hoping, there is a lot of plot holes in this. There's a lot of details that were not followed through on, there's a lot of plot holes, there's a lot of dead ends and red herrings in general that the fans were hoping the extended and deleted scenes was going to address. And unfortunately, even the director goes, yeah, I noticed a lot of people bought it. It doesn't help.
No.
If anything, it makes it worse. I'm so sorry.
But I will say that there is a lot of deep dive into the history in the DVD and facts. Like, and they even say, like, hey, this is what we were inspired from. We couldn't actually do that, so here's what we did instead. Yes. So at least they're open about, hey, we're not accurate in the least at times.
I agree. And I also think that while the theatrical cut is fine, and it does make this movie's runtime much more manageable, I do think the extended scenes do add just the slightest amount of context, because there are some parts of this movie that whiplash a little bit quickly.
Yes. No, exactly. So, Gladiator, as you mentioned, it was heavily inspired by Rome in general, because Franzoni was working on Armistead in Rome and began researching and writing the bare bones of what would eventually become Gladiator.
Yes.
And the movie ended up being an easy pitch to sell, which was a little bit odd. And I'll get into that in just a minute. But Scott was eventually selected for his ability to create coherent other worlds, aka Blade Runner and Alien.
Yeah, sure.
As well, they brought on Kathleen Coleman as a consultant to make sure the games were as correct enough as they could.
Which I appreciate to an extent.
But at the same time, the games are never fully addressed. They're only mentioned in, like, 1 or 2 lines in other contexts, so we don't actually have a full understanding of what the games were. No,
and which is kind of disappointing, because that was something a lot of fans picked up on and were confused by, was what exactly is happening in the fighting ring. Because don't get me wrong, the fight scenes look really cool, and Russell Crowe and the rest of the cast and crew, especially the stuntmen, did a great job of choreographing and working through a lot of these more complex fight scenes. But it is very clear and obvious that we have the old one at a time, lads, one at a time problem.
Pretty much. But Logan was brought on to tighten the dialogue, and Nicholson was finally brought on because the writing wasn't going well, and they needed to make the characters more likable.
And by this point, you will have noticed that that's a lot of people brought on to help with the writing. This did not actually help. If anything, it made it worse.
No, from my understanding, I think it helped.
It helped some, but that is the crew's main complaint.
No.
There are some interviews with some of the cast and crew that came out much later that the movie came out. That was not part of the DVD set. This is like outside getting to talk back about their career. And the number one complaint about working on Gladiator was that the writing was shit.
No, it was more because there was commentary on it in the DVD itself.
Yes, there
was.
But
it was about the fact that the writing was kind of also changed on the fly a lot of times, and on top of that, it was still being partially written while they were in production, and it was a hectic production on top of that.
Yes, I did get to that point on the DVD.
Yeah.
Later on down the line, when people were going back and talking about it, there seems to have been either an increase in people's memory, which is possible, or a sympathization that happened during the commentary recording.
Okay.
Because some people, like Crow, remember the hecticness of the writing to be, yes, it was bothersome and people were frustrated by it, but it led to a lot of really great lines and a lot of great scenes. A lot of other people, especially stuntmans and people working on the sets, were very frustrated with this because there wasn't really a set crew for this. Like, normally for a film this size, especially something that was meant to be very historical, there's, like, a bunch of people involved in making sure costume is set and like, creating props, managing props, moving props. That, for budget reasons, was kind of whittled away throughout the creating of this movie, which led to a lot of frustrations because people would make a prop and then discover that we're burning down the house. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
But this ultimately relegated Franzoni to be more in a producer role. But on top of that, ignoring all the problems with the process and the making of the movie. Even the tightening of the script, because I will say I think it's a relatively tight script.
Yeah, like there's not a lot of lollygagging, minus the fighting.
There was skepticism of whether this would do well at all because the sword and sandal genre had been long dead, even with every attempt in a 40-year time frame to bring it back.
Oh, sure. All of the ones that we have from between the 60s and this one were all fairly B movies, and most of them were relegated to just like a fun giggle watch.
Exactly, because those unfamiliar, the sword and sandal movies, also known as peplum or neo-mythological films, were a style of film that emerged towards the end of the 50s in opposition to the artsy films from the Italian neorealism. These films became popular overseas as well, particularly in American drive-ins, due to their poor quality and their recreation or retelling of myths completely inaccurately. And the dubbing and production quality were not very good at all, which is something I personally find interesting, as the popularity of these films were superseded by the spaghetti westerns in the mid-60s and another short-lived movie genre era. But we also see this come up again in the 70s with the resurgence of bad kung fu movies with the rise of Bruce Lee.
And then after that, it moved to bad superhero movies. So, there's always going to be something that is the quick and easy bad.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see the trend of us enjoying what I'll call the foreign spectacle.
Oh, for sure. And the other thing that was interesting is, while Gladiator did a great job of reviving the swords and sandals genre, his genre didn't last very long.
No.
We got maybe 10 years worth of decentness out of it, and while we never dipped fully back down into what it was in like the 70s with just some like, filler movies, really, it moved on into CGI hot mess, which honestly is kind of like today's version of just a for fun, silly movie.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, there were good historical movies back in the days.
Oh, sure.
Particularly one that relates to this movie was 1959's Ben-Hur.
Oh, yes.
Which Scott even mentioned he grew up on the very classic ones, so like the ones from the 30s to the 40s.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's just a very interesting, like, this very much created and then, like, topped out the genre all in one fell swoop. There
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot of, like, climb after it.
Yeah, and because of this, because they knew the history of the genre, they went to find out new ways to invigorate the sword and sandal genre, which, as well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this led Scott to not wanting it to be a period piece like the others had tried to do, because he felt that it made it too theatrical instead of being a film, so to say.
Sure, I can see what he meant to do.
Yeah.
It's just, it's one of those things where when you create a movie like this, that you're trying to bring back a genre in its entirety with just one movie, you also have to be ready to accept that whatever you create, whatever you strip away from that old version of the genre to create, the supposedly better or more entertaining one, that's going to become the new base level for the whole genre. So while I agree, I do think this is much less play-like, it's much less theatrical, it did create the entire, like, over-the-top, it's all fighting, hardly any dialogue style of sword and sandal movie.
Yeah, which is exactly what we want.
I mean, no, don't be wrong, they're very fun, but at the same time, like, there's been a push to revisit these and bring them back towards the drama. It's all just a cycle.
Yeah. Basically, their goal was to do a story, not history.
Yes, they did that.
Yeah, and this led to the exploration of realism as versus a vision of what Rome would be, using different references such as, like, films such as The Triumph of the Will, which, for those who don't know, is a Nazi propaganda film that is very well known for its stylization, and I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. But also to point out that the Nazis pulled a lot from the Romans too, so the imagery is very easy to see back and forth because it's the same resource that you're using. It's like copying an essay.
Yeah, no.
And slightly tweaking it.
Yeah. No, they do definitely have their similarities, partially because what they were trying to get across with different, like, heart messages is very much the same thing. This movie was trying very hard to get across what essentially became a revenge story with as little extra fluff and dialogue as possible.
Yeah. So, before we get into it, Chris, what are we drinking today?
Well, since we don't want to scrape sweaty man's back and mix it with blood, we have wine.
Yes, some Italian wine with a bull on it.
That works.
Cheers.
Cheers. It's very nice.
Yes. So, Gladiator.
Oh, Gladiator.
We open on the vastness of the Roman Empire and text that states that quarter of the world is under Roman rule, which
I don't care about the text, I'm not gonna lie.
No.
What I do like, though, is that this movie, and something that, like, I understand why, but I wish could have been played up a little bit more, was there is a good portion of this movie that does not take place in Rome.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I think it does a really nice job of showing the, like, breadth of the Roman Empire without necessarily creating a historical drama, while the setting isn't necessarily accurate. Like, it looks good enough.
Okay, it's close enough, because the movies gives a setting of 1080 AD, and Marcus Aurelius' campaign against the Germanic tribe, and their wars come to an end. They only have one stronghold left.
Sure.
And
again, the text, I don't care.
Yeah.
Get to the Russell Crowe part. Which
we'll get to there, kind of. Because the first shot we get is a man's hand on wheat dreaming, but on the war front. Which,
yes,
the hand is not Russell Crowe.
No, it is not. Yeah, okay, so how do you feel about the wheat scene? Because it feels mixed to me.
Okay, so I'm glad we've talked about this, because it kind of goes back to when we talked about The Last of Us and my hatred for flashbacks.
Oh, this movie's flashbacks, though.
But here, it's not flashbacks. These are dream sequences. And there's a difference. So, I think it's actually a good way of setting up the goals of the first act of this movie, because immediately we're showing that where his mind is at. We see that he's loved by his men and whatnot, but his mind is back at home, even though he's on the war front. So it's a way to show that inner monologue without saying, I miss home.
I agree. I think that using the dreamlike sequence works. I think my complaint with it, and I think this was a lot of people's complaints based off of reviews online that I could find, was the dreamlike sequence here really emphasizes his land and the vastness and, like, the crop produce of it. Take with that as you will. However, later on, when we get to the dream sequence, we are very invested in Phil and wife and child. However, he spends a very long time caressing said ground. And part of that was because they didn't have the set for the home. Like, this was written later. They originally weren't going to have this shot. It originally started off differently, which is fine. Like, this is a really good rewrite. I'm not mad about that specifically. But it's clear that it's a rewrite because later on we spend a lot of time being upset that the house is burned to the ground and our wife and child, who, like, I don't care what their name is because we see them twice.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, it gives us a reason to care for this character and have his goals. We don't have to know them, but we can be invested in the fact that he wants this.
Yes. I think the other thing that makes it work, but is something that... when you go back and watch this movie more than once, which honestly I do not recommend. I think that's the worst way to watch this film. There was Ridley Scott mentioned that he was heavily inspired. He wanted the look and feel of this movie to be based off of Renaissance and Romantic paintings of the Roman era.
Yes.
And a lot of those paintings that he mentioned as examples, one of which is Polaris Verso, or Thumbs Down.
Yeah.
A lot of those paintings have a tarnished varnish that has been purposefully left for preserving the work, right?
Yeah.
However, it means that everything is slightly yellow in those paintings.
And so
this whole movie is also slightly yellow.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, I can see it on a lot of...
And while I think when this movie originally came out, it wasn't necessarily an overdone thing to have these, like, over-the-top filters.
We hadn't gotten to 300 yet.
We hadn't even gotten to Twilight. The king of filters. But now, looking back all these years later, it is one of those things where, like, there is no scene in this movie that doesn't feel like it has a filter on it. Mm-hmm. And once you've, like, started to look at it, it's really hard to unsee. And so for me, it was a little distracting. I liked the dreamlike sequence. I agree with you 100% there. I agree that we don't necessarily need the, like, original intent was he was supposed to be going through his home. We never got the sets built, so we rewrote it. Fine. Like, it all works. It just all works in, like, this very strange sequence.
Artsy-fartsy kind of level of trying to read stuff.
Yeah, which comes off weird because we're about to jump into the battle sequence, which works so much better.
Yeah, but I do like getting it as a quick setup instead of trying to establish this later.
I agree. I think the timing's right. I think there's just enough of, like, a weird hick that, like, especially watching this, like, all these years later, it's just, like, the strangest little, like almost, like, I know it's meant to be a dream sequence, but it feels memory-like in how quick and how, like, tinted it is.
Yeah, it feels flashbacky.
Yeah.
I can see exactly where you're coming from.
Especially because we get much better and, like, more creative dream sequences later that I love. Yes.
No, it's definitely a way to show, like I said, where his mind's at.
Sure.
But one thing I also think about this movie, you did say it is very good at setting up the atmosphere of this movie.
Yes, the atmosphere's great.
But one thing that immediately starts to set this movie apart is that we don't have anyone in this movie. Well, most of the people in this movie don't have the stereotypical bodybuilder type that we associate with the previous Sword and Sandals. Think of, like, Hercules in New York.
Yeah, there's no Arnold Schwarzenegger here.
No.
And part of that was because Russell Crowe wasn't the first go for this.
I thought he was.
He wasn't. They had 3 or 4 people they considered originally. One backed out, and then the rest were not interested. And so they had Russell Crowe on the docket, and they were like, you know what, let's ask him and let's see if he'll do it. And originally he wasn't interested because the movie before this, he had gained like 40 pounds to play the role. And he's like, I don't know if I can do it.
What was the movie you played before this?
I don't remember. I know I looked it up because I was like, he doesn't look bad in this movie.
No.
I think he looks really, really good, actually. I prefer this for, like, my hero, like, shape. I'm not gonna lie, I've gotten kind of bored of the Marvel body standard.
Oh, yeah, it's not realistic at all.
No,
American Gangster.
Yes. And so, like, he had gained quite a bit of weight for that previous role. And
good movie.
Yeah. And and as we know, Russell Crowe takes all of his roles very, very seriously.
A bit too much.
Yeah, but just later on we'll get to some of his cast and crew and how they felt about how serious he takes stuff.
Yeah.
But so he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to do this role, because he's like, I can't get, and like, granted, this is 2000, this isn't like over the top bodybuilding, but like, he's like, I'm not even sure I can get like good arms for this, guys.
Yeah.
And they're like, no. We'll make it work. We'll figure out a way to get it to work.
It's like when they, back to superheroes, when they cast Star-Lord.
Yes.
And they're like, well, we don't care if you lose the weight. We just want you.
Yeah. And so, like, I think it worked out well, because while he did manage to shed a lot of weight and bulk up quite a bit, it wasn't so much shredding that, like, he looked what he originally thought of. I think this feels a much more, like, realistic and human version of the character. And I think it worked out even better.
Exactly. So, we get to see that the Goths are ready for war, or the Germanic tribes.
Yes.
I do like the line, people should know when they are conquered.
It is a good line. If you know your Roman history, it doesn't work, but, like...
Yeah. And it's all about, like, them trying to manifest their future. We get quite a bit of nods to Elysium and the green field and sun on his face, which... Actually, now that you bring that up, that might have been a better line than the dream sequence.
Yeah, like, it all works.
I think it does.
It does work. It's just, it's a little odd because, like, I do think that the speech feels a little bit more impactful here. Mm-hmm. Partially because, like, while this has got a blue tone over the whole thing, don't get me wrong, it has the blue tone in the way that, like, it's nighttime and I still need to see what's happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I don't qualify that in the same way as, like, having a yellow or a blue filter over everything.
Okay.
So, like, I think this one looks more natural.
Well, and I think part of why you like this scene a bit more is because, and this is going to be artsy, is he has that line, what we do in life echoes in eternity.
Yes.
And that's something that carries on heavily through the rest of the movie.
And it carries on in a much better way than the original dream sequence does. Because while they do kind of play on it later, it never feels as genuine as that line does.
Yeah.
Like, when there's a discord between his dream sequences, which is, like, it's not a lot. It's not a big discord. But there's enough of a discord that it's hard to pinpoint his dream between, like, his house and his land and his wife and his kid.
And Elysium.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we do have this opening fight scene is really cool.
It is, yeah. It turned out good.
It's got great music. It's very violent, and I also think there's good ways of putting hints of peril. Partly because I like the way it plays with a little bit of history. They're supposed to be part of his. They're lucky partially because their legion is the Felix Legion Aurelio. Flavia Felix, which was the lucky Flavian Legion.
Yes.
Which is a super old legion that I like that it plays into it a little bit.
I do too. Like, there was definitely effort at certain points to pull in the historic bits. And I am a little sad that, like, I understand where they were coming from on not wanting this to be overly historical. Mm-hmm. However, when they did bother to lean more towards the historical, I think those scenes are the stronger ones.
Yeah. Because
you don't really need to, like, go over the top and explain everything like the original movies, like, pre-60s used to do. But it is such a nice little detail. It adds, like, that nice little touch. Something that a lot of people noticed, though. There's a dog, randomly... in this scene, and yeah. I'm not kidding you, the amount of reviews that I found from way back in the day of people being like, I bought the extended edition to find out what happened to the dog, and it's not in there. And even the director goes, he's like, yeah, we had the dog, it was gonna do like a wolf scene with the dog, and it never played out.
It was supposed to be a wolf.
Yes.
But they couldn't get a wolf.
No, because it's a wolf.
Well, you can, for
how chaotic they were shooting, that would not have been safe. Even by 2000s standards.
Yeah. But another thing I like about this scene too is that there's also these slight hesitations.
Yes.
Where it feels like he doesn't revel in the murder. He just does it because it's his duty and he has to survive.
The other reason why I think this scene really I like this start of the movie just a hair more than the dream sequence, even though I understand it and we've talked about it, is his hesitation, and also he follies multiple times doing this fight, which is something that later on the Swords and Sandals genre drops completely, is having, unless it's like an over-the-top failing, they never show the main hero not being the most perfect godlike figure on the battlefield.
Oh yeah.
Whereas in this where in this battle, yes, he's phenomenal on the battlefield, but he is not a god on the battlefield. No. He is actively losing men. He himself gets hurt.
Yeah, he almost dies a couple times. He gets close to being killed. Yeah,
and even Russell Crowe talking about the scene was this was a hard scene to fight. It was very dangerous. We were having horses run downhill through trees. Mm-hmm. I managed to snag a branch a couple of times. A lot of people were trying very hard to be careful because this was a really dangerous scene to do.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things that I think really set this movie apart from some of the other historical movies we've covered, or historical epics we've covered. Yes. Scott really sets a realistic tone for the battle. We've already established that.
I fully agree.
But not only that, it sets the groundwork for the movie and the realism that he tries initially. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, the woods were actually burned.
Yes.
Because the woods were slated for deforestation.
Yeah, it looks good. It flows well. Mm-hmm. Yes, the action is over the top, but not so much so that it feels unbelievable or that our hero feels untouchable. It just feels like a lot of very skilled people going, and the only bits in it are just 2000s styling, the shaky camera at times, the tilt here or there to match the hill roll or someone stumbling. It's not bad, it's just time period.
Yeah.
That's just how we filmed things in the 2000s.
Yeah, no, exactly. But a little bit of trivia on this scene too.
Yes.
So they did want to film originally where the battle did take place.
That would be cool.
But they had to settle for the Bournewoods in Surrey, and most of the Germans are Scottish and extras from Braveheart.
Yes, they are. And the other thing that kind of cracks me up a little bit is Russell Crowe, being an Australian man himself, spends a lot of time...
New Zealander, thank you very much.
Okay.
I know.
So I have friends and family who are from Australia and New Zealand, respectively, depending on which side of the family tree you're looking at. And it does crack me up, for someone who claims to be a very proud Aussie, he does not make any distinction between where these people are from, because he spends a lot of the time in the commentary at certain points being that man's an Aussie, that man's an Aussie, that man's an Aussie, and it's okay, that's nice.
I will say the commentary from a good chunk of the commentary from Crowe and Scott is very old person commentary.
It's a lot of reminiscing.
Yeah,
which is fun, but also there's a lot of bits in this DVD set, and I didn't need all of them.
No, exactly. But they have won, and we cut to the children of the Emperor, which...
Yay.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting start to introduce these characters, because one, we see that they're in an armored chariot because they're the children of the Emperor.
Sure. I do like that. That's good.
But we also have the early scheming ahead, because we're already being told that the Emperor's dying, and that his death will be honored with the games, which is setting up for Act 2.
Yes.
And we've gone from this kind of heartfelt battle, we want to cheer for these characters, to these cold children who, they're rather incestuous.
No, they're not just a little bit. They're uncomfortably amount. To the point where even when this movie came out, a huge critic point of this movie was, why? Why is there so much hinted incestuousism? Because this movie, like you said, really tried very hard to make the distinction between this being a historical drama and this being an epic, that just happens to be set in Rome, which is fine. If you want an epic, go for an epic, and I think that's what he was going for 99% of this film. And yet, at times where things get weird, he points to history, this being one of them. And I understand from the drama sense. Mm-hmm. partially because we only have 2 women in this whole goddamn film, and one of them is dead.
Doesn't have any lines. No, she kind of does. She calls the kid back.
She has like a singular line and is dead. And then the other one is the only other woman in the world, according to this film.
Yeah, now that you point that out, I didn't even notice. I was too wrapped up in everything else.
Which is good. I honestly think, like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for a love story. However, she's not needed.
She is needed from their point of view, and I'll get into that later on.
I know where you're going, and I agree, but at the same time, like, it is weird that we've added this tidbit so early. And, like, there are other movies that handle the historical incestuous problem better, I think.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It would have been better if they had just had kind of like a brother-sister relationship.
And just then let it be.
Well, and then later on, you're like, oh, he doesn't just love her, he loves her.
Yes, like, let it be up for the audience to make the jump.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we do not need to be told, no thank you. Because there was enough people who watched this with the intent for detail. Like, there were people who were actively looking for, like, signs of the dog. There were people who were trying to figure out the horses' names. Like, people would have gotten this. Like, people would have gotten that jump without us being told. I did not need to see. I did not need to know.
He got cock-blocked so hard by his sister that he went on to want to fuck an AI.
Yes, very good joke.
Yes. But I do like this bit too, because not only are the siblings cold to each other, they're really showing like what our vision of Rome is going to be set up to be.
Yes.
To the point where the troops don't even seem to like him, but they have to respect him because he's the son of the emperor.
Yes, I agree.
Also, unfortunately, having not really seen this movie in a long time, the movie is marred by fucking Harry Potter.
Yes, it is! I'm so glad you brought it up!
I can't not see the Emperor anymore without him being Dumbledore.
He is Dumbledore. He will always be Dumbledore, even if he was only briefly Dumbledore.
2 movies of Dumbledore.
And, like, don't get me wrong, I agree. It was an odd casting choice the first time round, because we knew what Dumbledore was going to have to do eventually.
I think he would have done it well.
Oh, okay, so the reason why fans were questioning his original casting was because by the point we had known in, like, movie 2, we knew that Dumbledore swam the lake in a Speedo. And fans were convinced that that scene was going to be in the movies eventually. It didn't, unfortunately. We're all very sad, I agree. But
I've never heard of fans wanting to see an old man in a Speedo.
Didn't want, needed. Those are different. No one wanted to see him. No one at all. But, like, we knew that the Dumbledore character wasn't going to continue to just be, like, the academic old man sitting behind the desk. We knew he was going to have to be...
He was going to scream at Harry Potter for throwing his...
So in the book, he doesn't.
Okay, so I do know a little bit behind that, too, and then we'll get back to Gladiator, but...
Sure.
The guy who ended up replacing him never read the books.
No, he didn't.
So...
Don't get me wrong, I still think he did a good job for not having read the books, however, like, not my Dumbledore. But, like, the fans knew that he was going to be an odd cast choice. However, he was a perfect first 3 books Dumbledore, because we still weren't in that active Dumbledore, like, he wasn't yet the weird, crazy man. Mm-hmm. He was still just, like, the eccentric old person.
Yeah.
And he's got that voice. And so whatever you know him best as, that's the character that actor will forever be.
What it is he has that slight lisp that some English people have, where it sounds cool. They don't sound like how when Americans have lisps, you're just like, what the hell's wrong with you? The British have it.
It sounds cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And the other thing that's kind of weird with the scene is not only does he break the mood for me, partially because, like, once you learn Dumbledore, like, it's kind of hard to unhear it. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that's really strange for me is I appreciate that Scott wanted to make the lighting for this room seem correct. Like, he wanted you to be able to see everything. However, to convince you of how bright he needed it to capture it on camera, he lit this fucking tent up with so many goddamn candles and, like, Aladdin-style lamps that, like, this tent would have burned to the ground or would have been hot as hell.
Yeah.
The toastiest of tents.
I mean, just don't fart in it.
My God, really, though. And, like, again, like, he spends so much time being like, we weren't going for historical accuracism, please don't look at the costumes, please don't look at the sets too closely, like, we're proud of them, but, and this is the but that, like, for me, I do kind of wish you had leaned just a tiny bit more into historical realism, because we could have had this not be a potential fire hazard.
Yeah, true.
Like, there's ways to get around it, but at the same time, the scene is cool, and it does set up the feel very well.
Exactly. This is where it starts slipping away.
I know he didn't want this to feel theatrical, however, he managed to do a full 360, and we're back at theater.
But in a good way.
Yes, I agree.
Yes. But I do want to talk about, I do think the costumes are really cool, even though some of them they have to twist a little bit.
No, I agree. I think the costumes are really cool in this film. Just don't use them to write a report card. No.
No, if you're using a movie like this or any of these historical epic films, you know, you got some balls, I guess. But
good on you. Because, like, but here's the thing. Is clearly someone who was in the set design, especially early on, did know something. Because some of these are really close.
Costumes were designed by Yanti Yates, who did heavy, heavy research in making the costumes as accurate as they possibly could.
And I would argue that you can tell blatantly where their influence starts and where Mr. Scott's influence starts. Because there are they are so close, but they are also a little bit more, like, romanticized. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more going on that, like, not necessarily would have been 100%, but, like, it looks good. It functions well on camera.
Yeah.
And then we get to the battle armor.
I think it looks good.
It does look good. It doesn't look realistic. It doesn't look historical, but it looks good, and it's memorable, and it looks really good on the poster. Mm-hmm. So, like, it's really clear to see...
Oh, you're talking about Crow's armor later on.
Yes, like the later on Gladiator armor. Like, the first half of this movie, arguably fairly accurate. Like, it would be a fun study to go through.
I thought you were talking about, like, his Legionnaire outfit.
No.
His Legionnaire... That stuff is, as far as I'm aware, pretty good.
Yeah, no, like, the first half of this movie, costume-wise... It's pretty on point. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a little over-exaggerated at some points. There's some details that are, you know, either removed or accentuated to, like, come across on camera well to let the actors act. But for the most part, it looks great. It's once we get to the Gladiator portion of this movie that the costuming takes a spin for the theatrical, which it's not bad. It looks good, but that's, like, it's strange to see such hard dynamics.
Metal titty plates.
Yeah, metal titty plates. I have a lot. We're going to get to those. Don't worry. I have words for metal titty plates.
Yes. But one thing I do like about the scene as well is that Commodus, Phoenix's character, is such a twit to everyone. But
and he plays him so well.
That's the great thing about it.
He plays him so well. He looks so convincing this whole role.
Yeah, I think everything I've seen him in, he's just gives it on. I think he's a method actor too, but
well, and that's kind of the thing too, is like this movie has so many powerhouse actors, right? But it is very strange to see, like, Russell Crowe is one of those actors that once you see him in something, he kind of just becomes that, and then is like, it feels like he's typecast, even if he's not, right?
Yeah, between, like, this and Les Mis, you can tell that it's Russell Crowe, but he's distinctly it's acting. I mean, it's acting.
It's acting.
Despite looking a certain way.
Exactly, but, like, Russell Crowe in between here and The Patriot, it feels enough like the same character that it's very easy to point and be like, oh, not the Patriot. The Scottish Patriot. Braveheart. Yes. Between those two films, it still feels like Russell Crowe playing a part.
Russell Crowe's not in Braveheart.
God damn it.
Are you thinking of Robin Hood?
Yes, I am thinking of Robin
Jesus
Hood.
Christ.
Look, again, it all blends together.
No, they don't.
They do. They do. They are all the same.
Okay.
Whereas I do think that some of the actors in this film become their character a little bit more convincingly.
Okay.
And I would say Phoenix's character becomes that character so predominantly that, like, this is the one for me where later on when I see him, this is the film I think of.
He gives a good name to sister fucking.
No, there's a different movie that has that better, but, like, that's for a different movie review.
But I do also like the building of conflict between the two sons.
Yes.
In a way, now that I'm thinking about it, it does make me think of, like, Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy, where Malfoy's the pure blood Roman, and Harry Potter's kind of this back alley wizard who just shows up and steals the day.
I suppose I can see where you're going with that.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Especially vying for the attention of what's technically the headmaster of the entire Roman Empire.
I see what you're trying to go with. However, canonically, Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter are the two that are on the same level. The prophecy could have been about either one.
No, I'm talking about, like, their rivalry.
I know. This is a deep conversation to be had off camera.
Okay. But we are off to the wounded and dying. I do like this bit as well, because it shows that Maximus doesn't shy away from the results.
Sure.
And he seems to be longing with his men. I mean, he's there. It doesn't seem like, or I guess the other way you could probably view it is that he is questioning why all this suffering.
I like that take better than belonging with his men.
Not like belonging with, but like wanting to be there to support them while they're in need still.
Yes, I can see where you're going. I think it's one of those scenes that there's a lot to process all at once. We've just been given a lot of character information, and I do like this scene as like time to process said all information, because like we really do have all of the info we need on our main Max guy. Like we know his character, we know his standing, we know what sort of person he is. And we also know what type of movie this is, so we know that that's not going to change. But we did just get told a lot of other stuff about other people. And so, like, this is a good, like, transition scene without having just, like, a quick snap.
True. But also, speaking of the wounded, the scar that we see, or the open wound that we see on Crow's cheek here is actually from the fight scene earlier.
Yes.
And a branch went through his cheek.
He's very proud of this.
Yeah. It's one of those, like, happy coincidences that this movie has, like, a handful of them that work really well with it.
Yes.
But the scene is also important because it does show that even while the warriors can go and rest, there's still stuff that happens after the fact, that the war's not, even though they've won, it's not over for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is a nice way of tying the, like, normal man back into a battle scene. Yeah,
it also shows that he's very reluctant to join the Merriments, but he has to because he's a general.
Yeah.
He feels like he doesn't want to be there and almost fish out of water, but he's there because everyone likes him. I mean, they even say, they're even surprised that he wants to be a farmer. They're like, Maximus the farmer.
Yeah, it is kind of odd, though, because, again, this is supposed to be such a, like, strong point of his character. That, like, again, we don't really come back to it ever again.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the character himself does. The rest of the, like, teasing about it, like, never again.
Well, because, I mean, he's not really involved with this group of senators, and on top of that, doesn't exactly have a farm and family to go back to.
That's true. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
They are all gone.
Yeah, it is a way to show that he's different from everyone else.
Sure.
And maybe even because of this, the senators are very favoring of him, which we see that Commodus is very jealous, and they show that this is more so to show that he drives for power and position overall.
I agree. I think that drive makes the most sense out of this scene.
And off screen, not off screen, away from those groups, we show that even the Emperor favors his daughter over walking. Yeah,
an awkward scene, not gonna lie. And part of the reason why it's awkward is because this is, again, the only other woman on scene. And we immediately get told, like, if only you were a man.
Yeah.
And, like, I get where it's all coming from. I really do. It's just awkward because there's not even women in, like, the background. The only other woman who really gets any, like, true screen time who's not, like, an extra standing in the Colosseum is going to be on a chariot wearing fake titty armor, and then is going to be cut in half in about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
We could have had more, like, background women, or just, like, showing some other dudes with other wives. Because at this point, I'm convinced that Max is the only guy married in the entire Roman world.
Well, no. Or married. Well, I mean, the Emperor has 2 kids.
Doesn't have a lady. He's got a daughter.
Did.
I guess.
He never remarried. He loved only one person ever in his life.
Sure. The long leap.
Yes. But from here, we do go on to the camps where I do think this scene's a bit odd in my opinion. I do like the snow.
I do.
They wanted snow, and it actually snowed for real.
How lucky.
But the prince sparring, it feels very much playing war, where he's practicing after the war is already done. So he's not even, like...
Yeah.
Involved. Which, I mean, the real Commodus, because... Okay, so that's the thing, is... Commodus and... Aurelius, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, are based off of real people.
Sure.
And this is where the movie really starts to, like, skew the history real hard.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of almost wish we had made up emperors and, like, fake sons. Because it's kind of close, but also it's far enough off that, like, there's no reason for them to have been named this.
Just to give historical context, maybe.
I guess, but, like,
well,
there's plenty of examples of, you know, Roman-esque sounding names, and we could have just, like, gone with it.
I think I get into it a little bit later. But Commodus wasn't liked.
No.
He was one of the emperors who was in the ranks of, like, Nero or Caligula, which
we know, we've all heard about them.
We didn't go in those routes, and I think this is the safer route to go, and that's why he chose those names, so that way there was some historical precedent.
Sure, I guess. Again, though, we flip very hard between it has history or I don't want it to be historical.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know?
Yeah. But Maximus is called to meet the emperor, where he even is questioning the point of it all and the meaning of the sacrifice. And I like this scene in the way that they did really develop the relationship between him and the emperor. Because Aurelius, when he's talking with his son, it's always formal and straightforward. But when he starts talking to Maximus, they get to his level of conversation and changing the position of their sitting. So they start off as co-workers talking as men, and then they go to whispering, to sitting down, to being a bit more, quite more intimate. To
I agree,
actually
this is
talk.
well written.
Yeah, which, one thing Scott brought up is that, and this is all in the dialogue, especially between these two, is he specifically limited the use of language in saying, like, Lord or my liege, because otherwise it does get into that theatrics of, yes, sir, no, thank you, sir.
I agree. I do think that, like, it does. I do think that there are some simplifications that he used that do work very nicely. And then there are parts where we backpedal real hard and lean very much into, like, well, it's historical. I'm in the camp of, like, no, the parts where you just throw history out the window work really well. Keep going. Don't have any history.
If this was really historical, they'd be speaking Italian, or no, Latin.
They would have been speaking Latin.
Yeah. But not only does it bring them to, like, a more intimate level than we ever see with him and Commodus, it also further establishes that Maximus is an outsider. He's never seen Rome, and he has this golden vision of what Rome should be, very much so like the Paris syndrome.
Sure, I see what you mean. And honestly, like, I think it works, especially because we do spend a good deal of time not in Rome in this movie. Like, enough so that I almost wish there was more not in Rome bits.
Yeah, the first hour of this 2 hour and 40-something movie is not in Rome. We don't see Rome until well over an hour in.
Yeah, and I like it that way. I think it works really well. It establishes the, like, empire, it establishes the scale of everything happening. I think it works. Yeah.
And even from here, they go back to being co-workers, and Maximus is offered the title of next emperor.
Wow, a promotion.
Yeah, because his morality is what Rome needs. It's been taken over by politicians. It's run by politicians. Something that unfortunately kind of rings a little bit today.
Yeah, this is where, unfortunately, a lot of these sorts of movies end up back in the weirdness of like, alright, you've made the point a little too loud.
But that's why it stands, is because it's something that even almost a quarter of a century later still works if you took it and made like some dystopic modern context.
No, I fully agree there. It's just one of those things where it says the quiet part just a hair too loudly.
Yeah.
Because we were doing so well. This scene was really well shot. Granted, this is a huge fire hazard. Those men would have melted to death because it's got balls in there with all them candles. But, like, it looks really good, like, just from a screenplay point. Like, the audio works really well here. I think the dialogue works really well here. We've really done a nice job of establishing our villain as both a villain and also a realistic person with more realistic, like, human villain style goals of just, like, wanting to rule and be powerful and to, like, be jealous. Like, those are human qualities that make a good villain. Not necessarily, like, evil for evil's sake. And then we, like, bring in, like, and don't forget, American politics. Like, it's just a little bit too, like... But we roll over it very quickly, so it's fine.
But it's also, like, has politics really changed that much in that time frame?
No, but there's no other politics in this movie.
There is. This movie is very much a political drama.
It would like to be if it wasn't not how the Roman politics worked.
What, you mean stabbing your emperor? Et tu, brute.
Okay, that is not...
That's how a lot of the Roman emperors were dethroned, was they were fucking murdered.
I agree with you there, but we're about to spend the next 2 hours chained to people fighting tigers.
Yeah.
Which I like, and that's the point of the movie.
And this is the second movie in a very short time frame where we've had people chained to other people.
That's true. Yeah. Unfortunate.
Yeah. But now Maximus is out and he has a conversation with Lucilla. Or Lucilla? Yeah, Lucilla.
Woman.
Yeah, let's just refer to it. Woman 1.
Yes, live woman.
This is the part where I think the writing is quite good and sharp for this movie.
Sure.
There is very much the attempt and failure. It's a very one-sided attempt to build some type of sexual tension.
Yes, and like the commentary does talk about this a bit, about how they were pushed to add in a like love interest scene and even a like romance scene. And both, you know, the actors and the writers and directors were like, we don't need a romance scene, but we can, I guess, squeeze in a love interest for you, which I get. It's just one of those things where like,
okay, so here's the thing.
It's well written, it's well acted, I just don't see the point.
There's a point.
Okay.
So, her being in love with him was their attempt to soften the movie and give that little bit of romantic interest for a female audience. A stereotypical female audience.
Which I would agree with if it wasn't for the fact that we can just look at Russell Crowe as a gladiator for the rest of the movie.
True.
Which is honestly, that's how you get a lady to go.
But they didn't want it to be action all the time.
True, but we do get not action all the time later with him and his men.
Yeah. And also, so here's the other thing too. I think it works well because it's in the same vein as like Miyazaki and his romances, where just because boy loves girl or boy and girl meet doesn't mean they end up together.
I agree with you there on that logic, but where Miyazaki feels
wholesome.
No, not even that. It feels more like a natural part of these characters' lives, whereas this feels very much like a god shoehorning her in for narrative's sake.
Here, I'll argue against that. So, it adds to why Claudius doesn't like him. It creates a very odd love triangle.
It does.
Because this is set to establish that they have history, that they were involved at one point. And maybe, just maybe, Commodus is a little jealous that Maximus was boinking his sister and he couldn't.
Which I could have gotten behind if there was more to that plot point at all. But unfortunately, like, she feels... Like, the actress does a great job of trying her best to portray her. And the writing's not necessarily the problem here either. The problem is that it's very much feels like a little, like, you are to represent the entire world. Whereas with every other character, we get a nice balance. We get a nice balance of the worst politician and the rest of the politicians, who are also scummy, but they're not the worst. We get the best soldier, but we also get the rest of the normal soldiers, and we even get the, like, gladiators later on to really help shine that character.
It's like the weeb shit where it's like best girl kind of shit.
Yeah, like there's nothing for her, there's no reason for her to shine other than the fact that she is alive.
She is the only woman that is important in the movie.
And like I could understand and appreciate this character so much more if there was literally anyone else. Not necessarily, like, vibing for attention, not necessarily, like, there to compete with either our hero's love or our villain's love. Literally just someone in the background to say a line, to make this woman feel like she has a reason to be special. Because right now, the only thing making her special is because of about-to-be-dead man and her brother pointed to her and said, special.
Well, so that is it's kind of interesting. So I've been reading this collection of Japanese folktales that are set around I don't remember actual dates, when Kyoto was still the capital of Japan, so before the Edo period.
Sure.
And in the introduction to it, they're explaining that women at that time weren't really talked about, and even then, in one of the stories, the woman who's the focus of the story isn't even given a name, and she's referred to as this other person, as the sister to the brother that's explained in the earlier portion of the story. So. And
Western media had the same problem, and honestly, it's like a recycling problem. And it got so bad at some points that in theater, the women role simply got replaced by a, like, brother figure or a son figure. And honestly, that's where my problem with this character lies. It's not necessarily that it's weak writing. It's not necessarily that the acting wasn't good, or the costuming wasn't good, or even that the dialogue wasn't good. It's just that she doesn't feel real in a world full of very real characters.
Okay.
Like, their hero feels very real. He feels very grounded, which is saying something, because I don't normally say that about Russell Crowe's characters. However, I think this one's really good. I think Maximus is an excellent depiction of, like, a stellar soldier without being a god. And I think our villain, like, is a stellar example of a villain who has very human reasons for being a villain, as opposed to just evil for no reason. She, however, like, and again, it's not bad writing, it's just that there is no one else to compare her to other than dead wife who has one line.
She is woman.
She is woman, and that is why we love her. And that doesn't feel good enough. For a movie that's so good, for a movie that had so much attention and effort put into it and had so much talent behind it, she feels fake in a world full of very real people.
Yeah, no, I see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
That is my, like, number one complaint of this movie, and that includes Boob Breast Lady coming up.
Who's barely in it.
She's in there for 5 seconds, and she dies immediately.
But I do also like this part, too, because it shows that while in a way, he's very much Valjean again.
He is Valjean again, yeah.
Even though he didn't, in this regard, where he didn't grow up around that and in that society, he still knows their tricks and he's not falling for it.
I also think that this sets up the child, especially since we have a child actor playing a rather important role. This sets him up to have some really, like, flexibility in his role, so that way we feel like he's a true child and not just a prop that gets shuffled around. Because I think he does a good job. Yeah,
well, and we haven't even seen the kid yet.
I know, but, like, this is setting up that interaction to, like, have that next level, that next layer of complication in between our hero and our villain.
Yes and no. That's coming up in a bit. So, because the next bit, so we do have in their conversation that he will never serve a man. He only lives to serve Rome, which again shows him to be the golden boy.
Sure.
But here's the thing. From here, immediately we go to, he has his little time for prayer, and he dreams of his family, again, tying back to what he really wants.
And I like this dream sequence better because it feels a little bit more of like, blah.
Yeah.
Like, it's not so whiplashy. I like it.
Yeah, it's not just kind of randomly inserted. But what it serves is, and why I think it works well, especially tying back to the beginning of the movie, this really shows his conflict between his duty and his desire. Because he wants to serve Rome, but his heart is back with his family. And ultimately, he does make the decision that he is going to serve Rome and he will be the next emperor. Which I kind of forgot about. That, like, I remembered seeing this movie a long time ago was that Commodus finds out.
Yes, I also like this reasoning better. I do think that I agree with your memory, though, that while it is a good reason, and I don't think it's necessarily bad writing, I don't think it's emphasized quite... It's not, like, re-emphasized as strongly later on, to the point where, like, I do think a lot of people forgot this was, like a main character point. Yeah. Because we do have flashbacks later to our love, and, like, there is such a huge emphasis on revenge later.
Because it's overshadowed by... Are you not entertained?
I completely agree. I think this movie has parts that are good, and there are parts that are even better, and those even better, that's what people remember.
Yeah, because now it's time to actually drop the news to Commodus.
Oh yeah, by the way, everything you love is gone.
Yeah, he's like, you'll still be involved, but you're not going to be emperor. You'll have someone else. And I like his thinking that immediately he's like, okay, so what other elder is going to go there?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, but ultimately, I mean, this is Aurelius sealing his fate.
Yeah.
And this is where we do get the, hey, everyone's made their choices. The one person who actually kind of has power is not going to be accepting of this.
True.
So, and the one thing that they do that I think is good in an attempt to portray accuracy.
Okay.
Aurelius did die in 1800. But he died of potentially illness. They don't know 100%. There was another plague that was going around.
Goddamn those plagues.
And Commodus did take over when he was 18 years old.
That is very young.
Yeah. But the way I like how they justify it, because the history is so old, we don't know 100%. So that's where you can twist it a little. It's not like Braveheart where the history was so close where they're like, these battles happened at a river. This one happened at a bridge. What happened to that bridge?
I agree. Like, it's not Braveheart atrocity. Because that's truly an atrocity. But at the same time, there is no reason why this man could not have been named, I don't know, Biggest Dickus. And just been placed during this time period.
Yeah.
Like, okay, very few people know the Roman history well enough that if you had no title card and you just made up a Roman-sounding name, no one would have noticed. Because at no other point in this movie are we trying to be historically accurate.
To be fair, even if we do know the history, Commodus does sound kind of made up. It sounds like they're like, he wants to be a commander. We will name him Commodus.
What should we name our main character? I know, Maximus! Because Max also sounds slightly modern.
And he's Gladiator to the maximum.
Yeah, like, we've already got stupid sounding names. Why not just continue? Why not just be like, and this is my son, Dickus?
Yes.
Like, evil villainous. Like, again.
Womanous!
Yeah, like, it doesn't need to be that silly, obviously, but, like, this is one of the only parts that I do feel is, and we've talked about this phenomenon before, where when directors go back, especially after it being even just a little while, honestly, like a year or two after making a film, and then they go back and talk about their process and their thoughts behind it, there is something lost in that time period where they at one point had, and like, I don't know if it's pride or if they've truly just forgotten parts, but like, there is something to be said about, like, when a director goes back and is like, yeah, well, I say one thing and then I do another thing and then I do another thing.
Well, part of it is Commodus was given the fate of Dominato Memori, or condemnation of memory, upon his assassination, where they attempted to actually wipe him from the history books, much like Caligula and Nero.
Sure, unfortunately, we know a lot about both of those people.
Because stuff still survived. But there are portions where you can go to statues.
Oh, sure.
And you'll see names crossed out and
sure.
written back over.
Oh, sure. No, the Egyptians had a much more effective, I think, tactic at doing something similar. But it's one of those things where, like, there is something that, like, happens when directors pause long enough and think about what they've done. Because, like, the director on multiple occasions in his own commentary, like, over and over again is like, this isn't, we weren't going for pure history. We weren't going for any sort of, like, accuracy in our history. So, like, I wasn't paying attention to dates. I wasn't paying attention to any of this. I was just trying to make a very good movie. Great. Then why did you include this? Because at some point you had a thought, you had a reason to, but you've lost it for so long because you waited to talk about your movie. Or you realize that the reason you had way back in the day is a silly one, and you refuse to admit that you had a silly idea and it ended up in your movie.
How dare anyone have a silly idea?
I kind of like it though, because we've had other directors who are like much more blatant about like their thought process, even if they're like, yeah, I put that in there. Now that I think about it though, that was kind of dumb. That usually works so much better because like there's so many fans who took these as signs as like, oh, this is an Easter egg, as opposed to like this was like oops,
whoopsies,
like, or I changed it because I wanted to, as opposed to like, oh, this is a sign that this is how his like inner turmoil is. Like a lot of fans took this movie very seriously.
Yeah,
and there's some argument on whether or not you should.
I wouldn't.
I wouldn't either.
I think that's part of the reason I didn't go into the history of this movie is because it wasn't like Braveheart and it wasn't like The Patriot where they tried so heavily to involve the history. It's just like, there's kind of history, but it's not accurate, and we don't give a shit.
Yes, but at the same time, they keep bringing it up.
Yes.
Like an X.
Yeah. But now it's time for the execution of Maximus, which...
I do like this scene.
I do too. Here, I like it because this is the part where, like, Maximus starts going from goody two-shoes, pride of the emperor, to kind of being a ruthless dickhead at times.
A murderer, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, a little bit.
But it ties back into, like, what we talked about in the very opening scene where he doesn't revel in it. He just does what he has to survive. Once he has a goal, he is going to be hell-bent on getting it. Or should I say, Elysium bent.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I suppose so. I think for me, this is the part in the movie where I stop caring about any of the drama portion of the movie. Even though we do continue on several of those plot points later, like, they're not lost. However, this is where the movie moves from what it originally was, which was historical drama, into just action for me.
Yeah.
Because this is a very cool scene. It's well shot. It's over the top. It's unrealistic. And it moves our hero from being a very well-balanced, like, normal guy who gets hurt on the battlefield and cares about his, like, fellow soldiers and only really wants to go home and harvest all that wheat.
He's a rebel with a cause now. Yes,
which I like. And this is, unfortunately, like, this is a movie that has a lot of very conflicting happenings. They're all good, they're all well done, which is why this movie is overall well liked and praised and remembered. But they are all at odds with each other. And for me, I prefer the badass who goes around kicking people and stabbing them.
You just like Good Boys Gone Bad.
I do. And I think most people do.
And actually...
I think most people prefer that.
If they had dived into it a little bit more and, like, given him, like, the full, like, throws off his armor, shows his bare titties, like, all sweaty and hot looking.
He can't throw off the armor. The tiger has to rip it off his body.
Exactly.
There. That would have been a perfect movie.
Yeah.
And I don't like Russell Crowe at all. But I agree.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, I mean, from here we have that badass moment, but then he goes on this brutal journey. Honestly,
yeah,
we don't know how many days he's actually traveling to try and get back to home.
Yes, the only complaint I have with this is the very last scene when he gets to his home, because
we are not even there yet.
Yes,
because we cut to his home where the army's there, and here's what I think would have done better.
Okay,
is if they hadn't shown this.
I
and
agree.
He had just shown up.
I 100% agree.
Because I know it's saying that, okay, it's too late for him. It would have been cool to show it later. Kind of like...
I fully agree.
Yeah. So, I do like the bit that he kind of like has this premonition that, hey, something's bad happening. That would have been a good nod too.
I agree.
But what I also think is good about this scene too is... Mm-hmm. Well, yes, if they hadn't given the wife the one line of come back kid or whatever. But he is betrayed by those who represent his shining idol of Rome. Yes,
that is true. And I do wish we would have leaned into that more than the, like, loss of the house. And I only say that because while Russell Crowe's dedication to the snotty, sad look in this scene is very well done, very gross, 10 out of 10. Mm-hmm. Even when this movie first came out, the way this scene is shot feels goofy.
It is goofy because they only had like they only had it up to where the wife and child was hanging.
Yes.
And that's all they had. They didn't have anything behind it, so they just threw a couple broken pieces of pottery out.
And it's the same pottery they had earlier.
Yeah.
At a different location, like different spot, which is fine. Like, I'm all for reusing props. But it's shot so square on. There's not there's no depth to the shot. Like, it's
because they didn't have the depth. They didn't have anywhere to shoot.
And here's the thing. For a movie that takes almost 60% of this movie is filmed inside of a giant arena, but like on a very tight scale, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's mostly battle scenes, which are always filmed tight up because that's how sword fighting works. This movie...
Unless you're Bleach.
Yeah, unless you're Bleach.
And then you've got those weird chain blades.
We don't think about the logic of Bleach.
That's also a snake monkey.
We don't think about the logic in Bleach. They've stopped thinking about the logic in Bleach. For a film that does such a good job of making the camera and the angling feel like it matches the scene. Granted, it's not my favorite. I don't think it's overly well done. It's not like an exemplary form of camera work, right?
Yeah.
But it's good. It's decent. It gets the point across. It's not distracting, except for here. This is like the one scene in the whole movie that, like, this camera work looks strange compared to the rest of the movie. Mm-hmm. And I'm all for having, like, limited set and having to work around it. Like, I even am all for snotty Russell Crowe. Like, I think he did a good job of trying to, like, portray the character's sadness. Like,
yeah, he did a good job.
Yeah, he did a good job. It's just very strangely camera shot.
Well, I think maybe the other issue you might have with it, too, is not just the camera shot, but it's also a weird transitional scene because he passes out and a bunch of people stumble upon him and make him a slave.
Yeah, okay, that's also part of it, because, like, we spent a lot of time, not a lot, but, like, we spent enough time about him, like, wandering back home and, like, having to fight the elements and, like, being so exhausted that he passes out once he gets there. And then we just, like, immediately cut to him being hogtied.
Yeah, which there is kind of I do think the scene is cool, because this is where the dreamlike sequences come back.
Yes, and I think they work.
Yes, because this is the part where he's barely, like, hovering over the ground, and, like, he's just moving over it, very ethereal.
Yes, yes.
But, again, it's a good way of showing his mental state where he's not completely there, and he gets so close to touching dirt in a way that feels different than him reaching down to, like, rub the dirt between his hands. Because this is the part where, like, he's almost, like, if he touches the ground, he's dead.
The only other thing I have as a complaint for this, for specifically the part where he is now hogtied and on the cart, is it feels just a hair too close to the start of Skyrim for me.
Oh, you're awake now, I see.
Time to be beheaded, like...
Don't touch that. The maggots clean the wounds.
Yeah, like, it feels like a standard adventure, which I like. I like a standard adventure movie, but we've had a long time watching this movie already.
It feels like kind of a little bit of a restart.
I agree. And, like, there are definitely movies where I think that styling works, especially older movies that had a two-part system. Titanic is a great example, where, like, it is essentially, or Sound of Music. It has a definite middle point where, like, most people, even if you're watching it, like, all in one go, you take a break, you go get some popcorn, you go to the bathroom, you have a little jog around the house to get the willies out, and then you come back down, and it's okay if there's a style change.
Mm-hmm.
This one doesn't have that. Even the DVD is all one big go. And I think this movie's just a hair too long to do that. This would have been a great point to have a little intermission.
I watched a movie last week that had an intermission.
I love an intermission.
The movie was still too long with the intermission.
No! The point of the intermission is to help!
I watched Dr. Zhivago.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It is so fucking long.
It's really long. That one needs more than one intermission. But, like...
Yeah.
And, like, I understand that early 2000s, like, intermissions were not, even a concept. And it's still not really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
However, I really think Gladiator would have benefited from a 2-disc DVD set. Like, kind of how Lord of the Rings didn't really have an intermission in theater. No one really minded. But once you got home and you had the full theatrical release, which is what people were buying this DVD for, we had a physical break.
The only reason Lord of the Rings has that physical break is because of space on the special edition DVDs, because every single one of those DVDs not only had the movie, but it had 4 commentaries on top of it. So old school technology couldn't hold all of it in one go. So that's why those movies even have an intermission, quote unquote intermission.
Which is true. However, it's so ingrained in the audience to have that breather and have that break that most people still consider, like, yes, it was technology. We can watch all of those back to back. We can watch Sound of Music all in one go if I so wanted. But I don't. I want the break. And this is the breaking point of this movie. This is now a second part of the story. And I'm treating it as such. Because I think this half of the movie is entertaining, whereas the first half was good.
Okay.
The first half's writing was very good. The first half writing's costuming is very good. From here to the end, where we are just fighting shit, I'm entertained!
It does kind of jump a little bit once we get to Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I this part's good too, because we do have a little bit of he's finding humanity wherever he goes, especially in the people who are down in the dump. Not down at the dumps, just the people on the wrong end of history.
I also think this is
wrong end of society.
I also think this is a nice break from how most Sword and Sandals movies handled the gladiator portion of their movies. Most of them focus so hard on just the singular gladiator that there's no mention of how the camaraderie would have happened, or having multiple aspects to it, or the scale of Rome and how not everything happened in the singular colosseum. I think this is a really great scene. I think it builds the world. I think it makes all of this very realistic. I think some of it's a little over the top and hasn't aged super great, but like it overall works.
I think it's time to admit my only experience with Sword and Sandal movies is really
the Hercules movies?
It's only Hercules movies and the Ben-Hur remake.
Oh, no.
So that's really my only experience with this genre.
Okay, well, much like Westerns, this was a, family favorite for grandparent time. Granted, Westerns were by far their favorite, so, we watched mostly Westerns. But if a Gladiator movie was on, we were gonna watch it. And much like samurai films, where, the stellar ones talk about the full world, Gladiator films had the same problem.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because that's my side of historical epics is samurai films, and
there's definitely
my forte.
There's definitely some parallels between the samurai genre and the gladiator genre, because a bad one, but still entertaining one, would just focus on a singular samurai out against the world.
Mm-hmm.
A good one spends time having that samurai live in the world and talk to the people in the town, and maybe meet the bad guy before actually having to fight him later, much like how Gladiator films, some of them you just got thrown straight in the ring and you fought a bear, and some of them you actually get to meet your bad guy before you get thrown in the ring and have to fight a bear.
And sometimes the bear is the only bad guy you see.
Yeah, that's true.
But now we are to Zuckabar, which one thing I think is really cool about this setting is the arena was built, but it was all next to old mud and brick Moroccan villages and housing. So it was real.
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah.
I honestly kind of wish that this is the scene for me that really emphasizes me saying I wish we had more not in Rome bits.
Yes. No,
because
exactly.
this looks great.
Bring the Emperor out here instead.
Honestly, maybe spend less time about the Emperor, because this looks really good.
Yeah, but you gotta have a little bit of drama.
I know, and, like, I understand, like, story-wise it would not have made any sense, but, like, this looks so good, and then we're about to go see the Colosseum, and don't get me wrong, Colosseum looks fine, but it's aged. Yeah. This still looks great.
It does, exactly. But we were introduced to Proximo, and the dude from The Mummy, the prison owner. Mm-hmm. I do like randomly seeing him in movies.
I do too. He kind of feels like the cabbage guy.
Just a bit.
He's like a little Easter egg to find.
Yeah, but I also like this because we're setting up Proximo as kind of this asshole dude who's not afraid to hold people by the balls, metaphorically and physically.
Yes.
But we show that he is a merciless guy who's making his living by selling death and victory.
Yes.
Also, this is the first time we're told that Maximo's a Spaniard.
Yeah, okay, so this is one of the things where, like, I wish there had been a little bit more, like, there was clearly at some point in the writing an effort put into the detail portions of this movie and this script. And then there was a ton of rewriting that happened, and a lot of it happened while they were filming, which for some of the actors, like Crow, they loved, they thrived off it, and others hated it. Mm-hmm. Like Phoenix, wasn't a fan. But this is where I think we are losing a little bit of the writing, because there are really good little nugget details thrown in this, like the expanse of the Roman Empire, where people are from. Like, there's enough clues put in that, like, we could have had this whole thing really nicely buttoned up. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because of the rewrites, we get these kind of, like, loose threads. That, like, they don't ruin the story, they don't ruin the movie at all.
No.
But a lot of fans who were really into this movie, like, that was their big complaint, was, like, there was all these little teasers and they never led anywhere.
I think maybe it's also just a way to explain why it took him so long to get home from Germany to Spain.
I honestly wouldn't have cared, because, like, Rome, Odyssey, it all kind of feels like it ties together in my, like, you know, if I'm not thinking about this movie from, like, an academic standpoint, I honestly don't care how long it took the man. He walked the whole way, as far as I'm concerned.
No wonder he didn't get there in time.
His horse fell over partway there. He had to walk. Like, his car broke down.
Horses. The meat cars of the ancient world.
The vegan dirt bike.
Yeah. I hate that. But anywho, it's time to test their worth, as he does end up being bought by Proximo. The entire lot does.
Of course.
Which I think is what's interesting in this too is really up until like that one scene where he decides, oh, I will be emperor, I'll make sure Rome's good. Mm-hmm. He keeps leaving his fate to other men.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a real good point.
And when he does choose to make his mind the first time, it's not the right time to do so, or it's not at the good point to do it.
That honestly is a better driving force than, like, dead wife, not gonna lie.
Yeah. Just a bit.
Like, don't get me wrong, she's a much easier explanation, but I like that, like, detail level. That's really clever.
Well, so I'll get into where I got into that. So that it came from a little bit later on where that theory developed.
Okay.
So I like in this training is because this is where they're being said whether they're going to be basically cannon fodder or if they'll be gladiators.
Yes, and I do like this scene, but at the same time, it feels, it creeps too close to godlike warrior. But it's a short scene, and I don't really like. It's not a huge problem.
He can take hits with sword. He good warrior.
Cool. I can whack my arm on a door. This doesn't make me a good warrior.
No. But it's also a transitional time frame still too, because we see him removing his tattoos, which I do like. Because this part is all about setting up. Because we've gone from him being a general to him being in the world of the Gladiator. So that's why it's a little rough too, is because we have all this exposition of setting up you're going to be fighting until you're free or you're dead trying. But also it's his like quick way of trying to like shed who he is, because one, the tattoo was to show that he was affiliated with the Roman army, and if he was away from everything, it was to show he was a deserter. I do also like this crossing of culture. Was that a sign of your god? It used to be.
Yeah, it's clever, but again, it's one of those loose threads that, like, never pays off.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I see where fans were frustrated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, little threads here and there. We do see bits of early Christianity, which at this point was still being heavily persecuted.
Sure. Again, though, little threads that, like, really could have woven together, and we could have had something a little bit more substantial.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're also watching an action film about a guy who's about to, like, punch a tiger.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to pick one, and unfortunately, the tigers won.
Yeah, a bit. But also this part's good too because it's showing how Proximo is a man of the right price. He's Mr. Krabs, pretty much.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll bet against his men if it's a good deal.
Yeah.
But this is where I got the bit of where Maximus taking his fate into his own hands.
Okay.
The battle prep talk. Where he's the speech about how we are remembered and we can set fate.
It is a good little go, but it gets overshadowed just a little bit, I think.
A little bit. Because it immediately, he starts changing his fate from this point immediately.
Yes, I think so.
Because up until, like, we see now he's prepared for battle. Because originally he was just kind of sitting there like, well, I'm a dead man.
Mm-hmm.
But now he grabs the sand. And this is him, like, in a way, kind of like picking himself up by his bootstraps.
Yes. And
he's ready for war now.
And it is these theatrical bits that I like a lot. And I laugh a little bit when the director's like, we are not a drama. And I'm like, I don't know.
But now it's time for our first fight in a good 10-15 minutes. Because,
and it's a fight. I mean, it's fine.
I like it because it shows how unfair everything's set up. Everyone at the front feels like a Led Zeppelin. Like, they just get obliterated.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree that it is, especially the beginning of this fight scene, is set up to be very unfair.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the fight choreography for this whole movie is well done. It's just a little awkward at some parts, because we needed to be able to see Maximus being really good.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot going on screen. Because again, this is a sword fight, we wanted it to feel very intense, and the director talks a lot about how, like, it is challenging to convey the scale of these colosseums, even if it's not, like, the big one. Like, even these little, like, countryside stadiums would have been fairly big.
I kind of felt when I first saw the Colosseum, like, it looks big on the outside, but the inside felt a little small compared to, like, watching Gladiator to going to see Rome.
I agree, and that's we're gonna get to Gladiator's interpretation of the Colosseum here in just a minute. But I do think it is odd that we favored up close and shaky camera to enhance the action, despite going full in on, like, the over the top battles that would have happened for these gladiators, like impossible odds, impossible encounters, like. It was truly the Discovery Channel of the era.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, it is hard to portray the speed and scale without having some of it feel a little bit like a bad kung fu movie, where we have a lot of bad guys and a lot of stuff happening, but it's all happening one at a time.
Yes.
And so, like, this scene, I think, this battle is, I think, the weakest of the Gladiator ones, because I think once we got to the Colosseum, even though I disagree with how big they modeled it, I do like how they filmed later than this one. I think they've pulled back a little bit. We got to see more of the audience. We got to sit from the audience's perspective more.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little bit fake.
Yeah. No, I agree. But I do like this because it really shows where he starts to shine. Mm-hmm. Teamwork makes the dream work. But... And
I do like that, like, even Crow himself was like, I did a little bit of research on, like, the, like, army and, like, the different shield formations, and we could have learned this in 5 minutes, so it's, like, it was doable. And I think that's great, like, use of history. I think that's, like, where this movie should have continued on.
Yeah. Well, I like it, too, because it's also his kind of rebirth in Blood and Guts again.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Because we were very righteous, holy war styling at the beginning. Like, he was good at battle, but now we have a reason to murder.
Mm-hmm. Also, a little bit of trivia. The Minotaur's head might look a little familiar, but does come from the bizarre and fantastic Time Bandits.
Oh, very fancy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a relatively quick scene, because immediately we're on to Rome.
Yes.
Which we do have a change in color palette. We go from the very yellow, reddish portion to the cold colors of Commodus and Power. Already not liked from the get-go, as we see from the color palette and everyone talking about him. But this is where we see Rome very much as the grandiose Rome that they're trying to portray.
It is an interesting balance here, too, because I do like interpretations of ancient worlds, and Rome is an easy one to pick, right? But it's an interesting choice to try and... He clearly didn't want to show Rome as, like, this amazing great city, because he had his character imagining this amazing great city, and it needs to be dirty, it needs to be a proper city. They are not pristine clean, especially Rome. Rome was very dirty. But I don't know if we necessarily went dirty enough to really convey that to the audience.
No, it's just dusty a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And it is interesting to hear the director talk about how, like, he was enjoying playing with the light and the dust falling through the light and the petals and snow, like, throughout the scenes and all of that. I think is great. Love it. I don't necessarily agree, though, that it portrays Rome as what he thought. I think it just kind of looks good.
Oh, that's exactly what he was going for. He wanted it to look like almost a fantasy world without being a fantasy world. He wanted to portray Rome the way we wish Rome looked.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that the up-close scenes, I agree. I think it works. I do, however, think that once we get the overall shots, I don't think they've aged well.
I disagree on that, though.
I think they look just a hair too much like TV-level CGI.
It's probably aged a little bit, but I think what it does is it sets it up to look dreamlike in a way.
I agree to an extent, but I also think that, like, there is something to be said about maintaining the actual scale of Rome. It was very impressive for the time. There's no reason to adjust it to create a megathon of how the movie portrays it. It was already big. This is the ancient world. I don't understand why we chose to, like, shrink our camera down real low to create the height and add the, like...
It feels very modern city-esque.
Yes.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that.
And while I agree, I do think that it does portray this, like, almost unrealistic standard of a city that we are trying to, like, come across. I do think that, like, there are parts of it that do that, but I don't think it necessarily does so at the same scale of the rest of the movie. No.
Yeah, you're right on that, so. But it is a good way also of showing that Commodus is the opposite of his father. He's tyrannical, and his sister is able to read the room, but he's not.
Yeah, he's terrible at it.
Already looking for power. Setting his vision of Rome instead of trying to recreate and set up Rome to be a better city than what his father set.
Yes. Just there to reap the riches.
Yeah. One thing about the overall overview of Rome was it was actually a museum model.
Yes, which I'm glad that they were able to have that, but you can tell.
Yeah. I'm fine with it.
I think it works okay. I think it's just very strange because we've had the CGI flyby of it, then we have the model fly of it, and then we get to
street view
of it, and then we get to set view of it. And I think the set view looks the best.
I think we're a bit spoiled with at least in our profession, with, like, Google Earth and being able to, like, get our perspective and, like, okay, we figured it would be that size.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of those things where I understand that the director wanted to really convey how impressive this feat was. But the things that he found amazing and interesting about the building of the Colosseum were, like, the underneath part, the catacombs, the tunnels, the halls underneath, and the abilities of transformation that the Colosseum had, which I think he does a good job of showing off without increasing the scale of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things again where like we run into this problem of directors saying one thing. At some point he must have had a thought and a reason and logic behind it, but we've waited so long to talk about it that for whatever reason we've lost that train of thought.
Yeah. No, I get that. It is a hard transition between the 3 different scales.
Yeah.
Yeah. But from here we do get a cool Colosseum model. And I like this bit too because it's very much like Commodus to set up toys and play with inside the Colosseum.
I kind of like it though.
And now we are on to the actual Colosseum and 150 days of games, which sinners know the game. They know what's up.
Yes.
They're trying to distract and
oh yes,
keep the masses entertained. And,
much like the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and much like a lot of other activities that prevent us from too closely following those in charge.
And I think this version of that narrative works really well. I don't think it's pushed. I don't think it like reads too directly to the audience. I think this story level is really nicely written.
Yeah. But from here, we don't even go to like the full Colosseum. We go back to the smaller games where Maximus the Spaniard is now a legend.
Good for him.
He's now an entertainer, kind of, where
he's got a bit of a following.
Because he's too good.
Yeah.
Because, like, I do like the fighting different styles to show him going up against them. To show that he's better than... There's a reason he's earned his reputation.
Yeah.
But he's also proving a point of, like, this is just pointless slaughter. That's why I'm ending this in, like, 2 minutes. I'm not going to make these men suffer.
Yes. I do think that while it is brief, that explanation of character is really well done.
Yeah. And, I mean, in modern days, people complain about MMA title fights being too quick, or boxing fights, or boxing matches. That's right. Called matches.
They are called matches. And yeah, to an extent, some people have made that argument, and then recently we've also seen the argument of people complaining that some of the more like showy ones, like WWE, are stretching too long, and people will miss the days of when things were a little bit tighter. There's definitely a time frame to keep people entertained.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, I was, because I had just watched all the special features on this before I went on vacation, and I went to a baseball game with my dad.
Yes, baseball is a great example.
They were changing the rules.
Yes.
You've got a minute or you got 30 seconds to throw the ball, so that way a baseball game is now 2 hours at most instead of being the 4 or 5 hour games they used to be.
Yeah, so that people can drive home.
Yeah. But back to Gladiator.
Yes.
He is called upon where they both have ambitions and goals, and they both coincide that, hey, it's like, you can make it in the big times, kid.
Yeah, go get them.
Let's all go to Rome. I want to relive the days. I want to be one of the head guys at Rome again, or head of the gladiators again.
To the fanciful city of Rome.
Yeah, and you can have your revenge. I'm sure you... Actually, I don't know if Proximo has the same goal, knows that his goal is to kill the Emperor at this point.
I don't think it is. I think he's just in it for the money.
Mm-hmm. Which now he gives him upgraded armor, which is his old gladiator armor.
Yeah, I don't know. It's iconic. It looks good in the movie poster. It's whatever.
Yeah. And we get a little bit where he convenes with the other gladiators, and he's very much the common man now. We get his little bit of he yearns for death. That's why he's a gladiator.
Yeah, you know, it's very
kind of accurate for what he wants.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very poetry, but again, we've reached the second half of the movie where it has good lines, but it's so overshadowed by the stunts that you really don't care. Yeah,
because immediately we're back to Rome, which you get some solid matte painting.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
it's also a good way to show that Commodus has started to win the crowd already.
Yeah, that's true.
And the way they do this is he already has his big following at his own place, but now Rome's heard stories of him.
Yes.
And not only that, but Commodus' nephew, Lucilia's son, the only reason she's kind of important to the movie at this point now.
Yeah, that's true.
Is fascinated by the Spaniard.
Yes, I do appreciate the lack in security for letting the small child get close to the large murderous man.
Well, murderous man doesn't have weapons, and everyone else could get to him quickly.
I don't think that would stop him from just, ripping the kid's head off, but I appreciate it.
Maximus is a better man.
Yes, and I think it's a good, intro to a later theme of he clearly values the kid to the point where he will maybe not just slaughter someone in front of him.
Exactly. But we also have a little bit of drama and build-up here, especially for Commodus's character, where he's been in power, I think they said 53 days at this point.
A bit.
He's already looking for a legacy.
Yeah.
But also, he mentions that he's afraid of the dark, which shows he's still a child leading a country.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that they chose this styling for that, since we honestly could have gone younger, but then we would have had a grown man against a child. It's an odd play.
Yeah, exactly. But Lucilia goes to warn the senators that, hey, you guys are in danger.
And they're like, yeah, we know. We always are.
Yeah, but, we also get the whole bit of the rise of tyranny of down with the intellectuals and the opposition.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, similar to the end results of April in the Extraordinary World.
Yeah, though I do think that played stronger into the themes, where this one mentions them, and then just kind of continues on as if, that's just an underlying current. Because
we are distracted and entertained. We are all helpless to the masses.
And I think this movie does a good job on the entertainment part. Again, it has a lot of points that it brings up, some of which it bothers to follow through with.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them it doesn't, because we're too busy being entertained.
Exactly. So, but now it's time for Maximus and gang to enter the games. They're going to participate in the Battle of Carthage that they call the Slaughter of Carthage. And
sure.
For those who forgot about the Battle of Carthage, not Carthage, Missouri.
I don't think very many people are worried about that one, don't worry.
It was a Roman siege in 147 BCE during the Third Punic War that ended in the absolute demolition of the city. It left 62,000 dead and 50,000 enslaved of the 112,000 population present at the city, with a Roman loss of 17,000 out of 40,000.
Boy, those are not good numbers.
No.
Those are not good.
Yeah, but it's also to show the desperation that they've already rounded up all the slaves and the lesser fighters who are supposed to die in this battle.
True. Yes, that's a good point.
And it's a good way to show that the games haven't been going on very long, but they're already taking up not only the reserve grains that the senators were worried about earlier, but it's taking up all their entertainment resources.
That's true, and you do have to keep your populace entertained.
Mm-hmm. And now it's time to die with honor.
Yes. Or entertainment for those of us watching at home.
Yeah. Again, he grabs dirt, which ready for war.
Yeah,
But I think this works really well, too, in the retelling of history for fun.
Okay.
And changing it to have a different outcome.
Sure, I can agree with that.
It ties in so heavily to what they're doing with the movie. I don't think it's supposed to be, but it works.
I can agree with you there, yes.
Yeah, and we do get to see his general training coming into power play.
Yeah, natural leader.
And this is your favorite part where we get the armor.
The most ridiculous piece of armor to ever have been created. This is not useful, this is not usable, but it looks cool.
Bikini armor, I'd say, is worse.
No, I would argue that bikini armor would be better, because this way...
Then you could see more of the titties.
That is a good point. And also, the titties could move. I don't know if anyone has bothered to notice, but titties are attached to the chest. And when you
don't say.
And when you move your arms to, maybe swing a sword or stab with a spear from the back of a chariot, you do need your boobs to move. And if they are compressed and held in place by a tin can... it is very difficult to move without slicing your own boobs off.
You got armor in front. You got titty armor to prevent yourself from slicing your own boobs off.
Nope. The armor is what would take off the titties.
Oh.
Much like wearing, hand armor, but it's all one piece and it doesn't have any bends for the knuckles. A problem. It's not good. It's not useful. There's a huge crumple problem, potentially, but we don't have to worry about it because she gets skewered in half and she is dead.
What's a crumple problem?
So let's say you take a war hammer to the chest. A normal piece of armor would hopefully deflect that.
A little bit.
You've got some padding in real life underneath that to help soften the blow and maybe not crush all your ribs at once.
Anti-bash armor.
Yeah. This would have, like the equivalent of a soda can being crushed, but your tit is inside it.
Yeah, bruised titty.
You have no titty. You have an exploded titty. And so while this armor is silly and goofy, we don't have to worry about it because she gets cut in half by a spike attached to a chariot.
Yeah, this movie completely changed like my thoughts of car wheels as a child.
Oh, me too.
I mean, it's an epic fight.
It is, and honestly, like, this is the part in the movie where, like, I know earlier I said, like, that for me is the change in tone. This is the, like, true hardcore left turn that they took into just silliness.
Oh yeah, no, they even said, like, the crossbow of the time, like, they had the technology to do it, but the four-sided crossbow wasn't a real thing.
No, not like this. That would have not been practical whatsoever.
But it looks cool.
It looks real cool. These chariots, like, the Colosseum wasn't meant for chariot races. They had a chariot racing place down the street. I have seen it. It's cool. It's longer because horses need room to get up to speed. They're not motorbikes, unlike what I've said.
You mean a horse can't go to 0 and 60 in a minute?
Not like that. They need room.
We don't have a 60-second horse.
We don't have a 60-second horse.
Build me a 60-second horse, Commodus.
So, this would have been all... This is so over the top. It's so silly. Mm-hmm. But I like this fighting, and I'm glad that this is the style we go with for the rest of the movie.
Yes. Which, they defy the odds for the Battle of Carthage. I do like this bit, too, because it also shows man helping their fellow man in dire straits.
Sure, yeah.
And we also show him actually commanding instead of, like, demanding, you know?
Yes, I do think that this movie does attempt to show that well. Again, it's one of those things where, like, we had some show early in the movie, and that's why it works. It's a little awkward because we have no other references to go on. But the movie, at this point, has become so silly and so over the top that, honestly, the fact they're alive is a good enough reason for me as the audience.
Oh, yeah. But it's caught the eye of Max, or of Commodus, and so he obviously wants to meet the Spaniard because his nephew loves the Spaniard, too.
I am impressed, once again, that I am not the only person with no facial recognition, apparently, because this man has seen him before.
But he hasn't seen him yet. He's wearing a helmet.
Sure. That's much like me saying someone has cut their hair.
If you can't see the hair, how do you know?
There might as well be a different person for me.
No, exactly. He doesn't know any. He hasn't seen him in this armor. He obviously hasn't seen him fight because he hasn't been on the battlefields.
That's true.
He doesn't see his face currently. He only sees the helmet.
Fine. I will give it to you this time.
Yes. Thank you. But, speaking of seeing, I love the plotting of, like, him picking up the arrowhead, but they totally would have seen him pick that shit up.
Yeah. Also, we've already established that in this version of Rome, we have, snipers with 4-thing crossbows. So, like...
Arrows.
Yeah. It's a cool little bit. It doesn't go anywhere again. And... it's honestly kind of forgotten. Like, he picks it up and then, like, it just kind of, like, never gets brought up again.
He drops it, basically, afterwards. You see it. It's minimal. It's to be like, okay, this is the tension of, is he going to, or isn't he going to kill him?
Yeah, and, like, the beginning tension works well, and then we just kind of, like, whisper that away.
Yeah. Well, I do also like that we have this comparison where he compares them to, like, other... famous gladiators of Hector, or was it Hercules?
Yes.
I like that little bit of comedic touch to it of, like, nodding that, hey, the Hercules movies kind of were our predecessors.
Yes. And honestly, that's where most audience people are most familiar with this genre.
But he obviously is already one of the people in his first appearance now because he does get commanded to take his helmet off. And how dare you turn your back to me?
It's very over the top. It's very dramatic. And honestly, it's a little theatric. It's fun.
Yeah, because you get that big mic drop of, I am Maximus.
Ah, damn it!
Ex-General, you slaughtered my wife and child.
And
I will have my revenge.
Yeah, and then, we move on.
Yeah, but this part specifically was heavily pulled from the 1972 painting that you brought up, Police Verso by Jean-Leon Jerome, or Jerome.
Jerome. No, I don't think it's Jerome.
I don't know.
His name's Jean.
Jerome. That has saved for a heavy inspiration. It basically, the scene in the painting is a gladiator standing over another, and the crowd giving him the thumbs down. Yes,
very much, adding on to the America's Got Talent vote system we have today.
Yeah. But now it's time for the wannabe gladiator or wannabe dictator to be a shower with your baby about everything.
Yeah, I mean, he is very brattish from here on out.
He reminds me a little bit like Dennis Reynolds in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He's like, he vexes me. I am vexed. He is very shy of saying, Maximus is bastard man.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, people don't trust him right away, so of course he's paranoid.
That's true, yeah.
And from here we cut to Maximus meeting with Lucilia, who, this is where they have the sexual tension that's very good.
Yeah.
And very much the one-sided romance. But I like that they don't go diving into it like Braveheart and The Patriot.
I completely agree. I think while there's, flaws in having her not having any compatriot in this movie, I do think she's well written. And I think this scene proves it, where, there is room to have tension and not pay off that tension solely just to have a romance scene. I think it builds the character better. I think it makes the story more interesting. I think this works really well.
She is no longer just woman with lines.
No, she's still woman with lines, but we don't have a sex scene, which would have just been, too predictable. That would have been the, straw that breaks my back.
Exactly. Like, if she came down and they're like, yes, we will have our final thrust together.
Yeah, no. The fact that, he is, faithful to his goals and his original dreams of wife, child, and wheat, that makes this movie so much better.
Exactly. But it is also a little heavy-handed in other ways, where it's very much, you're struggling against the system, the mob is Rome.
Yeah, it's not good, per se, but it's also, not bad. I'm impressed with what it is.
Yeah. Oh, how I love a movie of rebellion, though.
Oh, true.
Yeah. But now we get to one of the added scenes, and it's the only one that I wrote down, because most of them are, a little extension of other scenes.
Yeah, you already know what's happening in most of them.
But this one was cut because it was a little bit too long. But I really do like it, because it is showing that the soldiers who knew that Maximus lived, there were consequences.
Yes, I do like that as well.
And it sets the example of good men. It kind of makes me think a little bit of Paths of Glory
Okay, yeah, I can see it.
But it's also, in a way, similar to the scene in The Patriot where he's testing him to throw the torch.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Will you give the command to shoot these traitors, so-called traitors?
Yeah. No, I think the scene works, and I do think it helps wrap up some of the plot holes that it has. However, I do see why it was cut. The movie's already getting real long, and while this does help wrap up the plot holes, there's so many other plot holes that, in the end, it doesn't, break anything.
No, exactly, because we're immediately back to the slaves, or gladiators, where they're even gambling with their lives in their free time with, trying to smack a cobra.
You gotta have something to do.
Yeah. And now his legend has grown. He is no longer the general, but the Spaniard.
The Spaniard.
I do like this little bit of comradeship and the comedy that does lighten the movie, especially after being so heavy for so long.
I also like it that it adds character to these otherwise just background characters, right? This is the sort of detail that I think this movie does exceptionally well. granted, there's very limited amounts. Like, we only really get this with the gladiators, which is, I mean, unfortunate, but understandable.
Testing his food for poison because now they know the Emperor's after him.
Yeah, and it also really creates, like, a well-rounded world where a lot of the other Sandal movies that came after this that were, like, very focused on one character and a lot of action, which this has, they fell a little bit flat, or they felt too cartoony or over the top and cheesy because they didn't spend any time with the rest of the characters.
Okay. Yeah, I have no clue.
It's okay. We'll watch them eventually because they're bad.
But I do like the line that comes from the scene. You must kill your name before it kills you. It
is a good line.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, there are a lot of good one-liners in this movie. They're just not,
they're sprinkled
like, zingers.
No, and unfortunately, they're sprinkled in between way cooler action scenes.
Yeah, because now we are back to more of the games, the feeding of the crowd. This is where we're at the 64th day of games, and they're already running out of grain supplies.
Yeah, this isn't going well.
Yeah, but we get the return of the only undefeated champion, Tigress of Gaul.
It does sound spooky. He sounds very scary, and he's got a cool hat.
Yeah. And tigers.
Oh yeah, and tigers, which...
Tiger.
I do think this scene looks cool. It's very over the top. It's very dramatic. He fights some stuff, and he wins.
It's a one-on-one fight with a man and a bunch of tigers.
And like 6 tigers.
Yeah, which... Okay, so tigers are cool in this.
Yes.
And everything... There was this... bits where they were saying that a lot of people thought it was CG tigers, but really it was just like the effect of the lens that made it look fake.
Yeah, I get what they're saying. I think there's other portions in this movie where the CG is a little bit more blaringly obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'm not upset by how the tigers look, honestly.
Just superimposed.
Yeah, they just look over the top, but we've reached a point in this movie where we've accepted absolute, like, nuttery as far as the fighting goes. So, like, I think the tigers look good.
Well, I mean, we also have the little nod of, to those about to rock, we salute you, where they say, to those about to die.
Yes. I also do think it's funny that, like, if you spend a lot of time looking at it, there's only, like, 3 dudes holding each tiger back by the chain. That would not have worked. Those tigers would have been free.
Well, they're kind of tame tigers.
3? No. There's no such thing as a tame tiger.
No.
Not adult tigers. And I don't think 3 men could have kept a tiger on a chain.
Depends on who you talk to. I do think it's funny when the guys are like, oh, I could take on a bear, or I could take on tigers. No,
so there's several zoos that actually have, like, tug of war that you can do with the tigers. Yeah, those 3 guys aren't doing shit.
No. But it's cool. Otherwise,
it looks great.
Otherwise, the entire arena is just a bunch of dudes holding tigers back.
I do like to imagine that there's just an entire wing of the Colosseum full of men being like, no tiger, go back in the cage.
But I do... This scene is also interesting in the way that they go from like, okay, he doesn't know who he is. Oh no, Maximus is still alive. But to immediately go to where he's not playing his game.
Yeah.
He's already run the crowd over, even with blood and death, when they only want blood and death.
Yeah, he's clearly the fan favorite.
Yeah, you will kill Tigress, and he's like,
Nah.
And
the fans go wild!
Merciful Maximus.
Which is, a great name to have your, like, arch nemesis have. How bad do you have to be to have that as your nemesis?
Corrosive Commodus versus, God, what was it? Merciful Maximus.
Yeah, like, one is clearly the good guy.
Yeah, it's just conventing and provoking him. Now he's...
Oh, for sure.
And now this is, like, in the hero arc, he's now the true unwavering hero, where we get plotting from the loyalists, sweet gifts and figures from...
that one guy.
Juba.
Oh, yes, that guy.
Yeah, which is a nice thing of, like, somehow he got the figures of his kid and wife back.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I know it's, like, an important scene in the movie, and I know it's, like, tying into the... I don't care. I don't give a fuck.
It's to bring the camaraderie back to that hey, he understands, like, why he wants death now. He wants to be with his dead kid and wife.
I'm all for the flashback dreamy sequences about wife and dead kid. Like, I feel like those are more powerful than the sudden introduction of figurines.
Yeah.
I think if the figurines had had a role somewhere else in the movie, I could have gotten behind the figurines. But we've relied on the dreams.
Yeah.
And I like the dreams. I think they work better.
I agree. It's just a little reminder without having to do the dreams.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. But again, much like the rest of the loose threads in this movie, they don't go anywhere.
They do go somewhere.
Yeah, in the dirt at the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's not good enough.
But we cut to Commodus throwing his little temper tantrum. Oh, poor you baby.
Yeah, so sad.
But I will say, Phoenix absolutely kills it in this scene.
He looks so good, too. Like, he wears the outfit so well. Mm-hmm. He, like, really does a good job of like, coming off as just, like, the most entitled, selfish little prat ever to have roamed.
Yep.
It's so good. His acting is on point for this.
Plotting for the end of his enemies.
Yes.
He
feels properly, like, mean.
Yeah, he is so goddamn good.
Because, like, there's a skill to being a villain, and there's definitely actors who are villains, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's a skill to acting mean, and I think this is, like, one of those few times where we have...
Mean and spoiled without coming across as a whiny little brat.
Exactly. Like, this is a really good level of, like, almost, like, overdone, ruler sort of thing. And I don't think we see this very often. I think the only other, like, really good example I have, like, that pops to my head quickly and easily is from the Game of Thrones series. Like, this is a very hard character to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. But immediately we go to plottings of rebellion. Mm-hmm. Even the common people are now publicly taunting Commodus, where now it's time to meet Gracchus.
You know, okay, I understand that these names are pulled from real things and people. They all sound silly to me.
Gracchus the Maxus.
Yeah, they all sound silly.
Yeah, I guess. I mean...
It helps that we don't say the names very often in this movie, I'm not gonna lie.
True. They also don't say liege, my lord, my senator.
Yeah, and the few times that they do put titles in, it's, like, so snakily done that you really don't notice them.
Exactly. But they're taking a big gamble on Maximus. It's been 100 years since any army invaded Rome, which, if I remember, my history is probably off a bit. Rome was actually afraid of the Visigoths and the Germanic tribes because at one point they came down and absolutely sacked Rome to the point where, like, they came, they took, and they disappeared.
That would be scary.
Yeah.
That would be
scary.
scary.
They weren't a conquering force, they're just like, mine? Peace, guys.
I mean, that would be troublesome for a young emperor to deal with. Especially one not in favor.
A young empire to deal with. We're talking like Rome is barely formed.
That's true.
When this happened.
That is very true.
Yeah. But also, I get them. I mean, they are very hesitant to believe in this pure spirit because, again, they have to deal with snakes all the goddamn time.
That's another good point.
Yeah, playing to be the spark, 2-day time limit of when they can get him out. It's like, it's a game of treachery. This is where the movie, like...
Honestly, from here to the end, I don't give a shit about the plot.
It's all to build up to the final fight.
It is, and the final fight looks good.
Yeah. Well, and even then, like, Proximo is smart and aware of what's watching around, or what's happening around him, because he's like, oh yeah, I'll they're like, oh, we'll pay for your freedom, and Proximo's like, you know, I'm not approaching these guys, we're being watched, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, no wonder you guys are getting killed off left and right.
That's true.
Yeah. But I also do like how Maximus brings him back down. He's like, or how he gets his freedom, where he's like, he killed the man who set you free.
True.
Yeah, really turns him of like, you kind of have a debt to this dude, and you're watching his legacy go down in flames.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Which, man, we get this bit where...
Yeah, say it.
He wants to fuck his sister so bad.
Yep.
Commodus does.
It's weird, it's creepy.
He sticks his fingers in his mouth like in Hellraiser a little bit, where it's just like...
Again, there are other movies that do the weird, old-timey, incestuous thing so much clearer, so much more consistently, and so much better. It doesn't make sense in this movie. I have heard the director's spiel for it. I see where he thought he was coming from. There's so much else happening in this movie. We do not need this level added on. It could be mildly hinted at if you really desire.
It's added because she can't get the same interaction with Maximus.
I know. Because again, we've only got one woman who's not dead.
And our hero wants nothing to do with her.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's one of those things where, like, this is a level beyond what we had already established for this villain. Like, there is no need to add to the treachery villainy. We already have a good rap sheet. He's already a good villain. We don't need to add Sister Fucker to the list. It's not necessary. He's already a terrible person.
He's crossing the last, taboo line, basically.
But he already had this marked, this was the first checkbox on his list.
It's more publicly accessible than being a nephew fucker.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But, I think...
Who else would they have added as a love interest for him?
He doesn't need a love interest. He's 18, running a goddamn country. He doesn't have time for this crap.
He should have been married and have children by this point.
Honestly, that's true. And, if we were trying to tie back into, being able to influence the kid and that sort of stuff, he already does that. The kid already, got his ear in both of these adults. This is not adding anything to this character that is useful, other than just making him icky.
Yeah.
And he was already a villain. He was already a good bad guy. He was already evil, whiny, entitled. We didn't need to add.
I'm okay with the addition.
I know you are. But at the same time, it's one of those things where, I would have been more impressed with a subtle hint that left the audience to make the conclusion themselves.
Instead of him sticking his fingers down his sister's throat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. This movie has so many good times where it is quick and subtle that there's no reason why this needed... there's no reason why this couldn't have also been something for the fans to look for and to grasp.
This is the only sex appeal, the sexy time appeal that we get in the movie.
We don't need any more because we have Russell Crowe's abs welded onto his armor. We don't need any other sexy time.
Well, I do...
Half of these men are naked. They are wearing small leather skirts. We don't need any others.
I guess. But now it's time to plot the escape. She's strong for her son.
Sure.
But in a way, I also think Commodus is potentially... Or no, he is 100% the product of kind of his father's neglect.
I would agree with you. And I do wish that had been more of an emphasis. Because, they do such a good job of making him an entitled prat that you do kind of lose the fact that his father always hated him.
Like in Austin Powers, Daddy wasn't there.
Yeah, but at the same time, that would be a hard, that is something to add to the character list of, why he is choosing to be an evil, terrible person.
Yeah.
It makes a good logical sense, and I think it adds to a villain, as opposed to just having them be evil for no reason.
I can see it. But, oh no, he's trying to bond with Lucius, who, makes the mistake of saying that Maximus is the savior of Rome. Yeah,
it is one of those scenes that's in there to increase what feels like the danger of this guy, but again, much like some other aspects of his character, it doesn't necessarily pay out, but I like the hint that is there. It's just an awkward scene.
Well, it's a necessary scene because...
It is.
I do like that he brings up that his poisonous hope has reached too far, which it's a good way of showing that someone's popularity extends way past where you expect them to, because even though we've been told that the mob is Rome and their opinion's the most important bit,
Yes.
This shows that now it's too close to him. Not only does his sister want to fuck him, now his nephew, who he kind of wants to be a little version of himself,
sure,
is now absolutely enamored by this guy who's his now mortal enemy, I guess.
Yeah, like it's a necessary step.
It puts him into a corner that he doesn't want to be in.
Yes, I like that. I like that phrasing.
Because immediately from here we go to the escape attempt, killing of everyone else.
Why not?
I do like the line with Proximus's last stand and his last scene in the movie. Are you in danger of becoming a good man?
It is a good line.
Unfortunately for me, the music feels very Pirates of the Caribbean.
Would you like to know why?
Is it the same composer?
It sure as hell is. It's Hans Zimmer again.
Motherfucker.
Yeah, and don't be wrong, I do like Hans Zimmer as a composer. I think his work is very good. Unfortunately, he has the bad habit of recycling bits. And so you're not the only one to notice that this sounds like Pirates of the Caribbean, and that's because it kind of is. He reworked this piece later, and it stuck and worked much better in Pirates, and that's part of the reason why, while his name is on the list for Gladiator, it's not one of his rememberable works. Like, the music's fine, but it's not...
They gave him one song to do, basically.
Yeah, and, like, they had other works lined up, some of them fell through, and some, for the most part, the music in this is just kind of generically okay.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But another part of, like, I like that all the slaves are down to help him escape, because they're aware that shit's not going to end well for them. But the one part that really gets me of this is that Proximo has left his armor and sword, and we take, like, 5 seconds to sit there and examine the sword.
I know.
When they're supposed to be running away.
Yeah, okay. Again, the director wanted this to not be very artsy and theatrical, and yet, here we are.
It's fucking Ridley Scott. It's always going to be kind of artsy and theatrical.
I know. And, like, it's not bad, it's just, it's very counter what the rest of the movie was.
Yeah. But, no escape.
No escape.
They were trapped. There was no way around it.
Of course.
Yeah. Get kind of a nice, cool closing shot of Ron looking really pretty.
Yeah.
It's good build up to kind of playing on the woman's death, potentially.
Sure.
And also, I like where Commodus is not really turning another cheek, but is very trying to be like, well, these people like him. If I'm like him, should I be merciful? Should I be the kind one? Bitch, you killed some actors in the scene before. The actors that were making fun of you. The part that, like, I had to rewind him, like, why are they firebombing a bunch of people sleeping in the streets? It's the actors from earlier that were making fun of him.
Yeah, you missed your chance to be merciful, my dude.
Yeah. He's really imposing of his, love, per se.
Yes. That's true.
Yeah. Which, now we cut to Maximo in prison and confronted. One man survived the fight, Juba.
Of course.
Also, I'm interested in not Maximo. I'm interested in Commodus's choice in armor.
Okay.
All white. Like, he's the good guy.
I mean, he is, while he is a whiny, snotty bitch, he is not a stupid bitch.
No.
So he is definitely attempting to play into the audience's interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think this is a clever way to do it. Is it realistic? No, I don't care, though. It looks good.
He also makes me think of, like, the first form of a Final Fantasy boss.
Yeah, you know, right? Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
But obviously, and this actually ties into history of, so he stabs Maximus, and
sure
the real Commodus did participate in gladiatorial games, but they were always stacked in his favor as far as we're aware.
I mean, that does make sense. I don't like it, but it makes sense.
It works.
Yeah.
But time for the final fight. I think the filming of this is interesting because it's a good mixture of steady versus shaky cam.
Sure, I can agree with you there.
Because we had, 3 or 4 years later, The Bourne Identity came out.
Yeah.
And that movie was so much or shaky camera work.
It was a little jarring, yeah.
This one does a good mixing of it.
I would agree, and I think part of the reason why it works is because this fight does a nice job of balancing in between being uptight and close with the action and pulling back so that we can see where everything is happening.
Yeah, because he was going to fight dirty anyways. I mean, he pulls out a dagger. But the one thing I also think is interesting is what ultimately betrays him is not someone close to him. It's one commander.
Yes.
Who is... I get why they cut the scene of testing his loyalty. Because it doesn't work as well with this scene. Because instead of he's loyal to Commodus, now he's loyal to Rome and the rules of the Colosseum where they won't give him a sword.
Yes, that does work better, I think.
Yeah. But, I mean, Maximus is surprising Commodus to the end. I mean, bringing back the dreamscape was a good choice because it brings it back to the edge. He's going to
fully agree.
The walls of his home, the fields now all bathed in blue, floating a little bit.
Yep, it works. This is where all of it pays off.
No, exactly, because he does kill Commodus, and he's true to his word at the end. He's like, free all the slaves, end this shit. Yeah. Restore Rome to what it should have been. He was a man to his word to the end.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think the ending works really well.
Yep. And as he dies, his body hovers again, and he's honored in death.
Yay!
Yeah. Buried, and Juba buries his figures with him.
I don't care.
I will see you again, but not yet. Which,
okay. I like the line. I don't care about the figures.
But here's the thing. I think it would have worked better with Proximo.
I agree.
Proximo, if the actor had lived, if Reed had lived, he died before this shot was seen, or the scene was shot.
Yes, he did.
And I think the reason it leads to a weaker ending is because we don't have, because they couldn't go back and reshoot at this point.
No.
We didn't have that building relationship between Maximus and Juba.
At least not to the extent that the other characters have.
Exactly. We have the little couple bits of banter of the wound will heal. Is that the symbol of your god? Juba feels more like a character who's kind of there to inform the audience of, or to give that little bit of exposition of okay, why is he doing this kind of stuff?
I agree. He doesn't feel like a bonded friend.
Exactly, even though they've survived multiple games. Well, technically, all we've seen, they've survived 2 games together.
And if there had been enough time to reshoot and rework, I agree. It could have worked, but they didn't have time. They ran out. Exactly.
So we finally get the tilt up of the sun setting on Rome. The end of Gladiator.
The end.
And successfully.
Oh my god, yes.
Highly successful.
Very successful.
Won a shit ton of awards.
It sure did.
And as we mentioned multiple times, it ignited a resurgence of the sword and sandals movies, including films such as Troy and Alexander, which I have seen neither of them. And maybe I've seen
Troy, I think you would like.
I've heard it's alright.
I would argue that from the sword and sandals, while I like Gladiator, I think Troy does it just a little bit better.
Okay. I know both of them were popular in their own right.
Yes.
But they weren't as successful as Gladiator was.
No, and I think part of that was because Gladiator kicked it off. It had a lot of big names attached to it. It was the second highest grossing for the year. It only failed to be first because Mission Impossible 2 came out at the same time.
Oh. Jeez, I didn't realize the Mission Impossibles were that old.
I know, right?
I watched the first 3 recently, and they're fine.
Yeah, they're fine. But yeah, I think part of it was because this was the first. This was the, big hype. Mm-hmm. I think on, a go back, on a rewatch sort of schedule, that's where Gladiator fails. Is the rewatch, the deep dive, and the fan base, which is normally where we see things thrive. This did great at awards. This did great for box office, and it did good when DVD came out for it, especially the extended edition one. But a lot of that was driving because fans were excited to have more, and there wasn't any.
Do you think it's maybe runtime now by today's standards?
I think that happens to a lot of it, yeah. But I think a lot of it is the extra bits. Like, that is what keeps a movie going well after it's, like, long past its prime. Like, this movie is old enough that if it wanted to be, it could be in the cult vault. But it's not, and part of that's because there's no extra for fans to clasp onto. There's no extra threads to pull from. There's no, like, yes, there's extra features on the DVD, but you're not really getting anything new there.
I think part of it is how it was marketed and how it actually plays out.
I agree.
Because I personally think that Gladiator is much more nuanced in the way it plays with history, where it has some coincidences, but it never attempts to portray itself as fact, compared to, like, Braveheart, where Braveheart pretended to be, oh, we are a biopic, we're accurate, and then we go into research and it turns out to be bullshit.
Yes, I agree, but I think that is also where they diverge, because while Braveheart was bullshit, because it was bullshit, there was something there for fans to grasp onto. Whereas with Gladiator, they didn't build their own world. They went off of history, but they also didn't want to deep dive into history, so they left out a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but what that means is that if you're one who's, like, if this is your genre, if this is what you're into, if this is what you want to spend your extra time looking into, there's nothing else to look into here.
But that's also what's great, I think, too, is that it really stuck with the swords and sandals bit of rewriting history to fit its narrative.
It did, but it did so in such a way that Gladiator, while good, is a one-time viewing sort of movie. There's not a whole lot to gain from watching this multiple times.
I'd say it's worth a rewatch every now and then. That's what I'd say.
I would agree. But I think for fans of the sword and sandals genre,
you're going to have a much better time with the 50s and 60s stuff.
Yeah. It's very similar to all the rest of the smaller genres, like samurai, like the old westerns, where, like, if that's your jam, it's because you're interested in the extra bits that happen in these behind the scenes. You're interested in the how-tos. You're interested in the history behind it. There's nothing to go on here. There's not even like a art book to go with it.
No, and I was gonna say, samurai films aren't that niche, and then I'm like,
you fucking lie.
I was just gonna say there hasn't been. I don't think there's been a U.S. samurai or big samurai film since The Last Samurai, like in the late 2000s.
No, I would argue that the newest pop culture samurai thing was Samurai Jack. Just cartoon for kids.
Or Samurai Champloo, but that's also Japanese.
That's Japanese.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and it's not that they're necessarily small. There's lots there. But that's part of the joy, is that there's lots there, there's lots to go into. These supposed, really good ones, the, exemplary ones, there's something there for fans of even just the genre to, point at and say, this is why that one's the best one, right? Whereas with Gladiator, other than just being very entertaining, mildly well written, well shot, and having good actors, there's not another layer. None of these people were overly enthusiastic about making this movie, like what we've seen with horror movies.
Ridley Scott was super into it.
Yeah, he does not count.
Russell Crowe is super into it.
That man really doesn't count, because that man's into everything he does, but not in the same way that, some actors, when they get into a role, they absorb so much that they bleed out into their into their role and into their fan base and into the rest of the group. Russell Crowe is one of the only actors that I can point at that has the problem of he does get really into his roles, but he doesn't manage to bleed that passion into the projects in the same way that other actors do. It
doesn't feel like how Mel Gibson talks about The Patriot.
Exactly.
Which I do want to say, too, is why I think Gladiator is still good in that regard, is that while there are things that don't fully pan out,
sure,
they're very quick and short-lived. It's not these bunch of, little side-branching stories like in The Patriot, where
that's true.
There's just a bunch of bullshit that goes absolutely nowhere.
That's true. There is one plot, there is just one narrative here, which is good. And I agree, an every once in a while watch for The Gladiator feels about right. But it's one of those ones where, much like some of these other ones we've talked about this year, where people remember this as a very high pinnacle of either the genre or just movies in general. A lot of the people that I talk to, friends and family who remember this, hold this movie up there, even though they haven't seen it since it came out.
Well, and here's the thing, too. So, why I think it still holds up, then, is partially because it is mentioned that it's, even though it's set in ancient Rome, it's a movie about modern times. Hear me out.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Braveheart is very much set, even though it has similar themes, so does Patriot.
Mm-hmm.
They're very set in the way that it's like, no, this is old-timey times. It's not like modern times.
I would agree with you to an extent. I think people do remember the themes of Gladiator better than they do the Patriot, and especially Braveheart. I think most people have forgotten what actually Braveheart is about. But I think where Gladiator pays off is it is very stylized, and it didn't have anything else around it because it kicked off the genre again. It didn't have anything else that came out around it that competed with it stylistically.
Yes.
And so that made it stand out really well in people's heads, and I think that is the number one reason why people point to this movie as an exemplary Gladiator film, even though I would argue it is not like a top-tier Gladiator movie. I think it's good. I think it's a good movie. I don't think, though, that people remember it accurately, but that's okay. I think this is one of those movies that's meant to not be remembered well.
I know what it is. Here's the thing. You recognize that stylistically, cinematically, it's a good movie. Narratively, everything about it's a good movie. You just like garbage too much.
I do like garbage too much. You are right there. But I think the real thing holding Gladiator back from moving from just being a good, like a good movie to great movie into that coveted excellent film section, right? That spot that moves beyond being like, oh, well, so and so doesn't like action movies, so probably not gonna like it, sort of thing, into that realm of, oh, it doesn't matter that you don't like it. You should see it. I think the thing that doesn't translate Gladiator is there is a small and slight but noticeable inconsistency for how long the film is.
Yeah.
And that is literally the only thing holding it back, but it's enough of a hiccup that when you go back and you rewatch it with a critical eye, as people would want to do if they were going to like be recommending stuff to friends, it fails just enough to put a little bit of a sour note in the back of your mouth after you're done watching it.
Successful enough to get a sequel now.
Yeah, I noticed that too. So
I am very curious because it is going to follow the story of Lucius.
Okay, and I also think that we have learned enough about both action and history reinterpretation pieces since Gladiator came out that I'm actually interested in seeing what they redo with this, because we have since gone through this big wave of historical drama, like, revamp and revival. We've gone through action revival, too, and we have seen the full play out of what Gladiator movies could accidentally turn into if you're not paying attention, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I'm hoping that we have learned from all of this and we get a really good movie. Because there's a chance, like, this was a very close to an excellent movie. Well, this was barely scraping underneath.
From what I've heard is, like, Ridley Scott's most recent movies have been good. They've been very long, though, and unfortunately...
He does suffer from length.
He's also a little bit of that stereotypical old man.
Yeah.
The youth don't know what cinema is nowadays.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem, is most of Ridley Scott's catalog of movies that are in the excellent genre, like Blade Runner, like Alien. Like, those movies are excellent because he managed to very specifically balance his really cool storytelling ability with his length and by having someone else with him to kind of flush out a few of the problems, right? So, like, yes, Blade Runner has a few loopholes, it has some plot threads, but those plot threads come back around because someone else in the art department saw them and picked up on it.
It stems back to our whole discussion with Hellraiser, where there's parts that, if you don't explain it, that's where the little bits of gold are.
Exactly.
Whereas, like, Gladiator has, the dog's gone, or, oh wait, how did Juba get these figures?
And, like, I'm not saying that it's necessarily, like, all on Ridley Scott for not having thought all that out. That's not physically possible for 90% of directors and writers. But what I am saying is he brought on a lot of extra talent for this movie that was supposed to help create a passion and drive behind it. And that is something we've talked about time and time again, that it is very obvious when there is that passion and there is that drive, because that's where you get those bits.
Well,
right? And, like, there are people who were passionate in this, but it was not so much that it drove the whole thing to conglomerately snowball in on itself, right?
And you might be onto something there, because they did bring up in the commentary that the moment Gladiator was done, Scott was already working on Black Hawk Down.
And while Russell Crowe really enjoyed working on this film, he didn't get along with several of the different casts and major actors.
I think this is the era where, like, he was still fighting everyone and shit.
So part of that was Russell Crowe has always been very open and against having people be open about their troubles with things like alcohol and drugs, which several of the people working on this film were struggling with very heavily during this time. And so he's always had this really awkward line where he's towed between, it's not a problem and I don't care, and I can't get over that hump, and that is the bridge that, like, we cannot cross, sort of thing. And this is during his, like, career where he was a big name, he was a big actor, but he also didn't quite have, like, the group that comes with being a big actor of you have, like, a group of other actors who help support you and help really get you to shine through, right? Like, he kind of bounces between what sort of other actors work with him, and he just keeps playing the same role at this time period. Yeah. Just in different settings and points in history.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something that the audience can definitely pick up on, and it's something that they can read, and unless you have a very skilled, like, editing system to, like, smooth that out, it's something that kind of reads across as, like, alright, well, you clearly weren't here to, like, live in and breathe into that character, right? Like, once the movie was done, you're on to doing the next thing.
Yeah.
Which we've seen, like, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we also know that audiences want an actor who is so passionate about that character that it becomes something they're into even outside of the movie.
Which, honestly, I mean, that maybe leads into, like, why Walking Phoenix as a Commodus is just so damn good in his role.
Yeah, because he was one of the few actors who, even outside of the movie, even after the movie was already out, when he would talk about it, he was in, like, he was fully in. He had gone through the research. He had taught himself as much as he physically could about this.
He had drinking the Flavor Aid.
He really had.
Drink the Flavor Aid. Drinking.
And, like, that is something that, like, it's not necessarily for every movie, right? But if you are wanting the movie to move from a great movie into excellent, everyone needs to see it category, that level of passion and, like, gung-ho-ness and self-promotion to a movie, that is what, like, tips the bar for a lot of these movies.
Okay. So, Chris, at the end of it all, on a good, bad, weird scale, what do you give this?
This is a good movie. Don't get me wrong. This is a good movie. There's faults in it. I think a lot of people should rewatch it to remember that this is not a perfect Gladiator movie. However, Gladiator movies are fun, and I do think this is a great jumping into point. Like, the genre is small, but it's a good time.
Yeah, no, I give it a solid good as well. Again, we do bitch about, like, the little parts that could have been done a little bit better, plots that, like, I get in writing it, you guys had to cut some bits.
Sure, I don't recommend watching the extended edition, I'm not gonna lie. Normally I do, normally I love them, but it's long, it doesn't add anything.
Yeah, it's 17 minutes of, like, one scene that's really good, and another scene where, Commodus stabs the statue of his dad.
And normally, especially with DVDs that come with a ton of extra stuff on them, I'm usually really for that. I normally love that sort of stuff, even if it's a little dry and boring. I'm not gonna lie, there really wasn't anything to add from watching the commentary and extras. Like,
well, and on top of that, so my thing with getting through that as well is, yeah, there's a lot, but a lot of it does end up repeating, and I run into that whenever I watch all the special features on extensive stuff.
Sure.
But the other thing too was there was a special feature where they have captions underneath that says when a part's extended, but they also give, like, the historical stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff gets repeated later on again.
Yeah, it just kind of felt like padding.
Yeah. So, do you recommend someone watch this movie?
That is a little bit more of a tricky question. If someone has not seen Gladiator and it's like on, and we're gonna watch it anyway. Like, yes, I'm not gonna like push to say no. However, if someone's interested in the Gladiator genre or in historical ancient Rome style movies, I don't know if this is necessarily like the springing off point, but it's not a bad one to start out with either.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it is worth a single watch at least.
I agree.
Just because it is good, it is iconic. It rebooted a genre for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, it took something that was so considered horrible.
Yes. And
bred new life into it.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad jumping off place, don't get me wrong. But it's maybe not my personal one.
Yeah, that's because you and I dwell in trash.
We do dwell in trash, but I also think there's a little bit more art. Like, there's a more artistic version. There's a more action version of good, modern, like, Gladiator style movies. This one tries to combine a lot of stuff, and it's not a bad starting off point, but it's maybe not the most tailored starting off point.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. So, but now we are to the part of our show, the 3 degrees of Takashi Miike.
Let's go!
So, for those unaware, we have, in the year 5 of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, we have decided to start a game. Here are the rules. 3 degrees of Takashi Miike. I have to make the movies connect in some way or another. Well, it has to be a movie connection. Can't be TV show connection.
Yes, yes.
And I can't use the same actor or movie writer, director more than twice the entire time.
Good luck.
If I win, we get an entire month of Miike picks from yours truly. If Chris wins, an entire month of Barbie.
My hopes are slowly fading every time we play this game.
There is still one coming up. It's soon.
Yeah.
I don't have a connection for one.
Oh, there's a possibility.
But it has finally happened for one of them that I've talked about that I've been trying to avoid.
Oh, here we go.
I went with Russell Crowe, who is in The Man with the Iron Fist.
Yeah.
Or Eli Roth did the screenplay and directed Hostel. That
there it is.
Takashi Miike has a small appearance in, because both Gladiator and Hostel featured people killing for entertainment, one accepted in its time in its society, the other not so much.
Congratulations once again.
I have finally used the Hostel card.
I was wondering when that was going to show up.
And again, the hard ones for me are when it's like actually big name actors and directors. When it's the small stuff, there's like a little bit of cushion that I can find.
Yeah, not with him though.
Nope. But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.